And let the record show that there are 5 commissioners present. Absent are Commissioner Szymanski and Commissioner Byrne. Obviously, this meeting is discuss draft budget for fiscal 2020, 2021 as presented by the city manager. You might want to lay out how you're going to handle this and then take over.
Okay, thank you, Mayor, Commissioners. Good afternoon. Yes, so we have handouts for the public in the back outside the room right here. Hopefully everyone has had a chance to take those copies. Commissioners each have a budget workbook, and the copies that were placed out outside follow the binder that each of you have. So hopefully that will be easy for those to follow through with this. So I'm pleased to present a balanced budget for fiscal year 21, City of Rehoboth Beach. We began with a challenging look at our capital improvement program, which is usually the challenge, and this year we had a $7 million capital improvement program, including over $2 million in water and wastewater. So from there, so that figure does include that. But then we obviously took a look at the essential priorities. You'll recall last year we had essential, deferrable, and those needs that were a priority. This year we have them categorized just a little differently with funded and unfunded and priority expenses. But we were able to take that $5 million general expense CIP and reduce that to the amount of $1,932,573, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes. But in outlining where we go from here, of course, in the bulk of our operating expenses, as is normal, is our personnel costs, including benefits and insurance for, which continue to be the highest driver in the general operating budget. What I did in looking at any salary increase for non-uniform personnel, that includes those that are not in the labor union, which obviously are the police department, police officers. I had the City Managers Association of Delaware take a poll of all Delaware municipalities to see when their fiscal year is and what their anticipated annual increase would be. There were a total of 23 municipalities who responded to that, and the increases ranged from 0 to 3.5%. So as for personnel in general, again, this year, the police department has included the hiring of 26 seasonal officers, and they'll be referred to as cadets. That 0 to 3.5% range for non-uniform, that increase, 2% increase is included in this general operating budget.
For both uniform and non-uniform?
Non-uniform. Uniform is 3.5% contractual.
No, so 911 is,
911 dispatch is not included in that.
okay.
It is included in the 2%, not the contractual. The differences in, personnel costs, and I'll just point this out to you briefly, but the Building and Licensing Department budget includes the planned retirement at the end of 2020 of the Chief Building Inspector, the promotion of the Assistant, and the change in position of the current Code Compliance Officer. And there's one addition to the staffing in Building and Licensing that would be in April of 2020 when this budget hopefully is in effect for the fiscal year. And that would fulfill the need for the compliance officer who will be filling the shoes of the assistant building inspector. And the reason for bringing that person on in April is not only to train with the compliance officer, but also to carry out the enforcement of the new ordinances the commissioners are enacting and moving forward, including the soil and erosion control and an expected grease trap inspection ordinance to come to you within the next few months to continue our aggressive stormwater remediation program. As I said, Chief Banks is pursuing the hiring of 26 seasonal officers or cadets, and as in the budget, this current fiscal year budget, the hiring of a school resource officer. And Chief Banks can discuss that with you if you have any questions about that. As you know, I've noted in past years, it's becoming increasingly difficult to hire and keep seasonal part-time laborers in the streets department for the increased refuse pickup. So what happens is we hire folks and then we tend to lose several staffers, especially at the beginning or in the middle of the season. But so far with the staffing levels that we have, we've been able to manage that. So in this budget are the hiring of the usual number of seasonal folks who will include trash pickup. Bert, do you want to just briefly explain to the commissioners the latest charts that you prepared?
Yes. I'm not sure how well you're going to be able to see this, but what I'll do is try to explain. But I started by, really focusing today with these charts on the cost side, figure out what's driving costs, why the budget is what it is. And the first slide I want to show you is the budgeted operating expenses and how they've changed since 2018. And which departments, this is pretty hard to see. So I'm going to
That's basically what we have in our hands.
Yeah, they have
basically
budget
what
operating
you have in
expenses,
your
right,
hands.
the blue sheet.
But I really wanted to look at each individual department and look at the operating expenses. So this does not include any capital items which are associated with the department. It's just the cost of the operating expenses. And our largest increase since 2018 was in the streets and refuse department. And it was a $541,000 increase since 2018's budget. Okay. And,
You can push that over, but towards you.
okay.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go. That helps. Then the next department that showed really significant increases was police department. They had a $364,000 increase since 2018. Well, these departments have the most people too, so there's a reason for that increase. But the purpose of this is to show you where those cost increases are. Our debt service is really not a department, but it's a major cost that I think needs to be disclosed. And we paid off our old loan, streetscape loan years ago, and we replaced it with the loan for the city hall. There's about a $300,000 difference between the two loans. And what our annual debt service is over $900,000. And that's an increase of $372,000 from what we had, but that was the price of having a new building. Your administration department's increased since 2018 by about $257,000. And a lot of that, there have been a lot of upgrades in the technical area and not at staffing and equipment, and I think a lot of those costs can be attributed to that area. But so really, if anybody would like a copy of this that doesn't have it, I can get you one after the meeting. But again, what I was trying to do is say which department is costing money and budget meetings continue as to, you know, why they're increased and what the justification is. This is a chart basically saying, well, capital outlays have become far more significant in recent years. In the last 2 years, you'll see on the far right that our capital budget last year, I mean, the year ended March 31st of 2020, is almost $4 million, $3.9 million. The proposed budget for 2021 is $4.2 million. And I think you can see what the commissioners have been attempting to do, which is to, you know, upgrade some of our infrastructure. And incidentally, these capital outlays include water, sewer, and the general fund. So there's a trend there that you have to take note of. The next chart that I have, and you really can't see it, and anybody that it's hard to see, but what I've done is I'll give you an example, and it's a little difficult or impossible to see, but what I've done, and again, I'll get a copy for anybody at the meeting who doesn't have this, but basically I took each department and I compared the salaries, just the salaries, which include overtime, part-time salaries, and full-time salaries, to see where the increases are. And the bottom, I mean, and this was, I focused on the general government, not water and wastewater, because those really haven't changed all that much. But basically, since the 2018 fiscal budget, our salary budget, including full-time, part-time, and overtime, increased almost $600,000. And this handout sort of tells you which departments had increases. So again, you know, I can provide anybody that needs one with a handout for this. The next thing I wanted to do, one of the departments that, and the streets department and police department both have had, you know, increases over the years. Well, this is a chart basically taking every operating expense item in the Public Works Department, including refuse and streets. And what I've done is I've taken each line item. Salaries, for example, increased by $105,000 since 2018. I'm using 2018 as a base year. I think it's meaningful. If you go too far back, you kind of lose meaning. And so I was really looking at a 4-year period to see what's happened. And so basically, in our streets department, our capital outlays have increased. And since the base year of 2018, we've increased just in that one department $745,000. There are other items that kind of stick out in this handout. Our contractual services increased by $109,000 since the base year. And all salaries for this department increased by about almost $145,000. So as these meetings progress, I'm going to have more charts, and we're going to look at more departments that, you know, so the commissioners and the public can see not just that the costs increased, but why they increased. And so we'll try to focus on that. But are there questions or a need for clarification?
I noticed that, so the capital outlays were 745 and the salaries are 104, and yet the net of all this from the blue chart here is, while streets obviously sticks out as the most, 541. So there were obviously some savings somewhere along the line too,
That's correct.
that took that down a little bit.
That's
Yeah.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think as Bert has explained in his charts there, the general operating fund, which is obviously the bulk of what we do on a daily basis, that there's savings
Yep.
inherent in all departments as we go along. I think Bert just wanted to point out the fact that the streets department in particular has increased over the years quite considerably. But if you look at this one chart where the capital outlays are,
Yes.
and the public can look at this chart. It's notable that, because it starts with FY 2012, that those 4 years until 2016 were pretty standard. I know when I first came in 2014, the the mantra, if you will, was to keep the CIP, if not under $1 million, just over $1 million. And, you know, we were able to do that, but obviously in future years, we added quite a bit more in services. The Munis implementation is a big part of what happened in starting in 2016, continuing in 2017. And then the spike from 2019 to 2020 is indicative of you know, the added costs and expenses that we put together in water and wastewater, concluding with the $4,204,000 for next year, which includes the rate increases in the water and wastewater departments. So I look at, you know, the first half of this as, you know, what was done in the past, and kind of the second half of this as the increases that we've made in deferred maintenance as we go along here. So I think that's an important chart if you want to take a look at that. And again, the general operating expenses are what they are. We can go over them and explain them to you. I have Chief Banks here today and the city arborist here, mainly to discuss their budgets if you have any questions about that. But I think, as we normally do, if we can just take a look at the capital improvement plan compared to why this number is in here and what we have been able to include in the budget, and those items that have been deferred or not funded, but particularly the fact that the department needs column. I don't know if you can follow along with this CIP vertical sheet here. Yeah, we're gonna give you kind of a presentation about how this plays out. So this is your revised, the date on the top left is January 3rd, 2020, and it's the capital budget. It's a vertical sheet, actually. Might be
I don't
easier for you to take a
think
look
we
at that.
have that. I have one in my notebook, but I don't think I have.
It's in the front.
It's the one that's in the notebook.
Oh, the one in the
Mine was
front.
separate because
Okay.
I had my book
Oh,
out.
here we go. Got it.
I actually have a lot of questions, just, maybe you're not done yet, but I'm not ready to jump to capital, the CIP. Is that what you're suggesting? Is that that's all we focus on?
No, absolutely not. Do you
Okay.
want to just start with the operating budget?
I personally would like to understand the operating expenses. If I just look from last year's budget proposal to this year, so comparing apples to apples, I mean, it looks like operating expenses have gone up $2 million. That's what I'm seeing, and tell me if I'm not comparing apples to apples, but I'm just talking about last year's budget compared to this year's proposed budget. It looks like operating expenses are up $2 million. So there may be some give and take, but that's what it looks like to me.
Can you tell us what sheet you're looking at?
Oh, yeah, I actually pulled out the budget from last year, that was the final budget, and I had this, the summary sheet on there.
Okay.
Summaries from
then-
18, compares 18.
Comparing it to
Right.
2018.
No, I know, but if you look at your proposed budget for this year compared to last year's enacted budget, operating expenses are up $2 million. That's what it looks like to me. So just
I'll
kind of
get
talk
you
me through.
clarification.
Maybe you're looking, Commissioner, at the bottom line number, which would include the CIP?
Might be the case.
You know,
Might be the case.
I think what we should do is just go, you know, you direct the charge. and then we ask questions as we come to certain things, because there are, you know, I may have questions about the capital improvement plan, you have questions about the budget versus last year. I think that'll come out, or a lot of that should come out in the explanation and the summary of what the city manager and her group's gonna do.
No, I hope it does come out, because that 2 million in general operating expenses, that's not the case, so, but we'll clear that up for you, certainly.
So we're back to this one.
Okay, yep.
Okay, thank you.
And if you, so the second column here with the department needs, that column indicates everything that we have been able to identify, what each department had. And that's what I said in the beginning was a CIP of over $5 million, $5,212,673. So you'll see that on page 2. And we've taken that number into the funded column, and we've been able to fund quite a considerably less than that, which is obvious. So if we take a look at this, and we asked the department heads, and certainly the Director of Public Works went through with his department heads just what was needed. And then we're going to go down the urgent list, which are priorities. So these items will be, they are included in the CIP. They are balanced out in the 9,900 line item of each departmental budget in your budget binders. And they do present for you the part of the balanced budget. So if we start from the top, under streets and refuse,
Can I stop you there? So basically what you're saying is the department needs add up to 5.2 million, but what's funded in your budget right now that's balanced is 4.2.
correct, including water and wastewater.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, thank you.
So if you just follow down the funded column, maybe that would be easier for you. It starts with the citywide paving, and Director of Public Works and Mr. Miller have prepared some slides for you to be able to identify just exactly what these are. These are the items that are funded, that are in the budget. So for the public's explanation, we can go along and follow through with this also. So Kevin, if you want to talk about the street paving? This is the regular $450,000 that you see every year for street paving, and in conjunction with the street paving, we look at the infrastructure under each street that we're going to repave and determine the viability of the water, especially if we need to replace that.
Just before we get into that, I have to understand this just very quickly, because it just, for me, it will help me listen to Kevin's presentation and others with a little more of an open mind. So this is the summary of your FY20, FY21 budget proposal, the first document in my binder.
Yes.
That's FY20, 21. Okay. That says total operating expenses of $22,385,000. So roughly 22 million, right? That's what that says. Total operating expenses, including wastewater and water. Correct?
Correct.
Total operating expenses. So this was last year's budget, right? So total operating expenses last year's budget, including water and wastewater, was 20 million. So there's a $2 million difference between what you're proposing this year and last year's budget, final budget.
I'm seeing 24 on here on another chart.
So I'm just trying to understand the big picture first before we jump into projects. So I pulled this chart from what you gave us yesterday in the binder, and then this is the published budget from last year. And I'm just trying to understand, it seems like it's $2 million difference.
Look at page
just wanna
1
understand that.
of your last year's budget.
Okay. Of
and
which
it-
budget?
Last year's.
Last year.
Last year's. Governmental operating, governmental operating fund budget was about 14 million, 13,996.
Of last year's budget?
Yeah, after all the
Page one.
charts, page 1.
The operating expenses,
Okay.
13,996, 140. this year, 14,405,054.
So last year it was, okay, then what am I looking
That's
at
the
with total?
government,
I
government.
think
fund.
I
That's
understand.
not including water and wastewater, correct.
That's right. We're just looking at the governmental fund. For,
So Commissioner Schlosser is looking at exactly what you have your finger on, right?
yeah,
And the total there is 22,385,000. Right?
yeah,
But that includes all of the expenses that are listed here.
Okay,
So the general fund, the police grant, streets grant.
okay.
yeah. I mean, I'm going fund by fund and looking at the governmental fund, the general fund, not much change there. It's 13,900 versus 14,400. Looking at the water fund, operating expenses, last year, the operating expenses were,
0.7?
yeah. And then in the water to wastewater, it was 5.4 versus 4.6.
So I'm just looking at the total budget, like the big picture.
To me, it looks like it went down 2 million, because if you, I'm on page 1 again, and if you look at FY 2020, the total comes up to 24,300,000.
Right.
So it went down 2 million.
I think the confusing part is that front sheet there, Bert.
Well,
This one, in our notebook, the front one? Yeah, okay, right, okay, yeah.
Okay.
Summary.
Maybe what you're saying is look at, if you're looking for expenses, not fixed revenue and expenses, exclude wastewater and water, and only compare total governmental fund operating
yeah,
expenditures.
and you
year
gotta
to
take
year.
your capital out of there. I think
Okay.
that's where you're
I
coming
think
up
that's
with
what
the
you're
difference.
saying.
You know, I'm looking at the operating side.
Okay,
And,
all right.
and if you just look at
I
the
see what you're
operating
saying.
expenses of those three categories, you know, they don't change $2 million.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. You're saying look at the general operating fund expenses versus
Yeah, and you can look
including the wastewater and water.
at the, yeah, but
I see what you're saying.
And most
I
of
understand
that
what you're saying.
difference that Bert just pointed out, obviously is 2% increase.
Right.
For non-uniform, 3.5% for contractual. And as expenses go up, you know, there's training costs in there, uniform costs, you know, everything that's not in the capital improvement plan. We budgeted very conservatively for an increase in insurance. We don't even know what that, for health insurance, we won't know what that is until probably for another month. So,
I see that
all
now.
the
I
operating
see if you
costs.
compared the operating costs versus the entire budget.
right, right.
That makes a lot more sense.
All the
Got it.
legal expenses, everything that's listed in your binder under each department.
I got
And
it
what
now.
Bert did, which is very helpful
Yeah.
this year, you also have a chart of accounts in your binder. It should be in the pocket on the first side, so it looks like this, chart of accounts. So that tells you exactly what, if you go across that, what account number is associated with each item for each department. And they're the same for mayor and commissioner's budget, admin, into the park and recreation department.
You guys both, between the two of you, you answered my question.
Okay, great.
I was comparing kind of
well, what happened last
a
year?
different thing than I should be comparing, so it
A lot
makes
of the
sense.
descriptions, because of the way the report comes out, were abbreviated. So we provided that chart, so you get a little better description. If you look at a line item, you say, well, what is that? You can go back to the chart of accounts, and it gets you a little better.
I'm good. I understand.
So I call it
Yeah.
pushing the button. So we do this starting in November, Bert and I, and then I meet with department heads. And when I say to Bert, you know, it's time to push the button and know what the bottom line is for the general operating expenses. If there were a $2 million increase, then I wouldn't be sitting here on my 6th-year anniversary. So that would not be a good thing.
That's why I wanted to clarify that.
We're
No,
here to
I think
answer your
I think you have to
questions.
take, to do the comparison I was doing, you have to take
Yeah.
out the water, wastewater, water.
Right,
And when you
exactly.
do that, you're only at the general operating. And that is, it looks like a slight increase based mostly on personnel wages, the basic increases.
Right.
So, yep, okay, thank you. I'm
And,
good.
I don't want to jump again, but the reason why I said we did this survey to each municipality in Delaware is to get an idea. It's somewhat arbitrary, but the important thing is to realize that we did spend considerable dollars on the compensation study 2 years ago and implemented that last year. We've never had a compensation plan for each employee and their job description. We have that now. It's important to increase that minimum, mid, and maximum number in each job description, in addition to awarding any kind of increase. Otherwise, we're going to fall behind again with these other municipalities are awarding 3.5% or 2.5%.
So is that the reasoning behind the big increase for dispatch? It's the ones that just jumped out at me in terms of percentages were dispatch, parks, and recreation and tennis, although parks and recreation and tennis are small potatoes comparatively. But dispatch seemed to go up a lot.
So, Chief, do you want to explain that if you can?
And that's not a part of the contract, right?
No.
Okay.
No, a lot of it is based on this year. Overtime went up, but it really shouldn't have fell under overtime. We need to get into regular salaries and how many hours per week. Just over a year ago, the state decided that you're going to have minimal 2-person staffing in your 911 centers, as well as we were able to have a group each week go home 4 hours early at 3 a.m. Now, because of the silent dispatch and the TDD and some different things the state has implemented, once you get on those lines, a dispatcher is designated to that line and cannot come off of that. So now we have to keep the second person to the 7 a.m. shift or the p.m. shift. So they're working 12 to 8, so I can't shorten their hours anymore. So this past year, it showed a significant increase in overtime on that, and we have no control because we had to have minimum staffing in there by law. So rightfully, it should be this year in regular salary, so you're seeing that go up to compensate for that. Now, with that being said, we had 2 people leave this past year through retirement, and we're in the middle of rehiring them and training them, and they will go to a split shift, and then you'll see it kind of even back out and go down where it was again. So I don't know if I'm explaining it very well, but basically some laws had changed, and we have to keep staffing in the air 24 hours a day, minimum of 2 at all times.
No, that helps. That helps a lot because that's the one that, to me, as far as percentages, increased the most.
Yeah.
Well, the street salary, oh, I'm sorry, Pat, keep going.
Yeah, now these other two feel somewhat, there's the percentage increase wise is big, but the amount, parks and recreation and tennis, and I'm just wondering what the increases were there because we were just trying to get them on
Right.
the same.
Yeah. So, and thank you for pointing that out. So actually, this year, we combined the Parks Department with the Recreation Department. So the city arborist has been supervising the Recreation Department head, the seasonal part-time, Tim Bamforth. She started doing that last year. And she's now becoming the head of that Parks and Recreation Department instead of splitting that out. So what you see there is an increase because of Tim Bamforth's salary and because of Liz Lingo's salary as a supervisor. So that was increased slightly, and that's a combination of the 2 departments. As we did 2 years ago when we combined trash and refuse. We made that into one department because you were seeing basically the same services in each department, except we split out the individual staff members, but they really are in the same department.
Okay, all right, well, that helps me understand those numbers.
Building and licensing is, pretty evened out because of that retiree, and then, of course, you'll have an increase in the assistant going to the chief building inspector and the code enforcement going, and now we have that range. So we start someone at the minimum of that level of staffing, and then as we move along, we adjust that salary.
Am I reading it right that the increase in wages, I guess, over the last 3 years was 11%, but the increase in the total was only 1%? At the end of the, it says increase 11% in 3 years,
Yeah, it's 1 point,
and 1.1.
so it's 111% over.
111, okay, fine, okay,
Versus,
all right,
so 11%, 0.11 being 11%.
okay, yeah, well, but then, okay.
So since we're in the, just still kind of general questions, the increase in streets to, by 104 in this, I'm on this chart now, the staff budget analysis, so that the streets has gone up from 104K just from 18 to 21. What accounts for that? Can you remind me? I think you said it quickly, but is there new positions in there?
We
Is it
have
just-
3 part-time seasonal positions for the recycling department that we did not take out, even though that you'll see recycling not in the funded portion of the CIP. So it's about 25,000? Is that correct?
Plus or minus.
Yeah.
That accounts for $104,000?
No, then there's a 2% increase. We didn't add any new.
So we added the city electrician back
Oh,
in.
yes, we did.
So if you remember last year, maybe it was 18 months ago, our old city electrician, Sam, help me, retired.
Sam Allen.
Right, and we elected not to recruit behind him.
Okay.
We thought we could handle it with contractors, so we brought, Apple in or Fox in, or these guys would come in and we tried to do it. So we were gonna try to do it on a contractual basis as opposed to have the full-time hire. What we found is while they do the work and they do good work, they're just not as responsive to us. So, we get the report that, there's three of the lights down the middle of Rehoboth Avenue aren't working. Okay, now it takes 3 or 4 days to get them to schedules to come in and do it. Whereas before, we'd have our guy out there the next day fixing those kinds of things. So we felt we wanted to put that position back into the budget. And then the 3, one of the other things that, the reason we wanted to keep the additional part-time or seasonals in for this year is, we've had a very hard time getting our numbers of seasonal employees, getting the guys that want to work, on the back of the trash truck for the whole summer, working 7 days a week, like 6 hours a day, but 7 days a week. So we feel that's contributing a great deal to the retention issues. So we wanted to up the numbers a couple so that we can work a better schedule for those guys, so that at least they're getting a day or 2 off, every week or so. But because they are stretched thin in order to get that 24/7 coverage, we were just driving them to leave us.
So basically, that number includes 1 new full-time position.
One new
and
full-
3
part-time seasons.
3 new part-time seasons.
Correct.
Okay. All right. How many other full-time positions have we added in this budget, other than that electrician? New positions?
Just the one in building and licensing.
And admin, did you say?
In admin?
What's the position in building and licensing?
Part-time position
Pardon me?
in admin.
What's the position in building and
enforcer.
licensing?
Code enforcer.
Code enforcer.
Oh, that's not just a backfill, that's a new position.
Yes.
Um,
But the one, oh, go ahead, Bert.
I was going to mention, you were talking about the streets department, and one of the items that's increased significantly in the streets department is the engineering. We budgeted 65,000 this year. Last year, we budgeted 25,000.
That's contracting services.
Well, and that's, the contracting service is another line item. We budgeted 192 this year. versus 184 last year. So there's an $8,000 increase there. So basically, there's 50,000 between those two items, almost 48,000.
Thank you. So building and licensing, I'm sorry, so how many positions are in building and licensing now? Full-time positions?
Seven.
And so you're increasing it to 8 in this year's budget?
Where one is retiring and we're
Right.
replacing, so we're
Moving people up?
moving one up, yes.
Okay.
And we're adding a compliance officer. So we're not increasing any of that.
Right, you're just backfilling?
Right,
And then there's some increase because there's transition, is that correct?
yes.
So it's the same number of
It's the
people.
same number of people, right? It's not a new position, it's just, and smartly, it looks like you're doing some side-by-side transitioning.
Yes.
So you're gonna have 2 people in one position for a period of time during
Exactly.
transition. That makes sense. Okay, so it's still 7 total.
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense, thank you. And so there's no other full-time positions being added?
No, I mean, it remains to be seen whether or not the replacement code enforcement position will be able to handle everything that Dennis is handling now, including
Okay,
more inspections and enforcement of the ordinances that are being enacted. Like I said, soil and erosion, grease trap, we hope to institute, and there's a third one. There's a third one.
okay, but right now, it's still just.
Stormwater.
Got it. But right now, there's still just 7 positions in the, now, and there'll be 7 positions next year.
Correct.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
But until that retirement happens, there'll be 8.
Yes, got it.
Okay.
Understood, because of the transition. That makes sense. That makes
Some
sense. to me.
things
Thank you.
that drive your costs too, if you have an employee who's been in place for many years,
Yep.
the payout can be significant.
true,
We
too.
had that
Yeah.
with the wastewater department a few years ago, and so.
Yeah, okay, that's helpful. And then just real quick on communications, I noticed that there's a salary in 2021 of 49,692, but there was nothing in FY '18?
That department didn't exist.
Okay, so this is a new department. Okay, so we're not increasing, because I noticed in the,
It's not going up 100%. Well, it is.
From 2 years ago.
it was just included under some other department before, is that correct?
We didn't have the position.
Didn't have it.
The commissioners requested a communications director.
That was around 2017 or something, maybe, something like that.
So why is there
18,
nothing in
yes.
18 for that department?
Probably, I think what happened there is that person may have been budgeted in admin.
It was.
Yeah, that's what I thought,
Yeah.
and then you
And we
And we
separated it
split it
out.
out because then that needed
Makes sense. That makes sense too. Thank you.
other expenses associated with it as a department.
So in this chart, it has 109,000 for the communications department.
Yes.
So if the salary's 49, what's that additional 60, roughly 50, 60?
Well, I think that one
I
of the
didn't-
big
I just
items
didn't catch
in
it.
there, there's printing, publication costs.
Okay, and that falls under that department. Okay. Sounds good. And thanks for doing these extra charts from, I know you probably came in yesterday or early today to do them, so
Did, I missed the
very
Eagles
helpful.
game, and I missed the Eagles game, but it wasn't worth
Oh,
watching.
no,
anyway.
if you're an Eagles fan, you're probably okay. You should be proud of them, though, they did well. They were in the playoffs, that's right. That's right, but thank you for doing them.
I'll
It's
have more
very
for the
helpful.
next meeting. I
Okay.
want to focus on the enterprise funds next time. And
Great.
give you
Okay.
more charts.
Thank you.
So if we can get back to the CIP, is that good?
Yeah. Good with me, thanks.
So the citywide paving, 400,
Yeah, I think you covered it.
okay,
450,000, kind of a continuation of last year's program.
okay. Lake Avenue and Second Street Streetscape Phase 2. This is obviously from what the bulk of what we did on Lake Avenue, and then this is the second phase of that. It's $400,000 because the 80-20% grant with DelDOT was not used this year because the project didn't happen this year. So we needed to include the 100 from this year into next year and put an additional 100,000 in towards the 20% that the city pays because some of the costs went up. Scarborough, or the stormwater utility feasibility study, Kevin?
If you recall, this past year, Evan was able to get us some grant money to do the Resilient Communities Partnership Program. And they were able to collect a lot of data on pervious and impervious area, best management practices, those types of things. So we want to strike while the iron is still hot and use that data and now turn that into something that we can use, because it's good current data. Use that to develop a stormwater utility for the city so that we can have a dedicated funding stream to do a lot of these stormwater repairs that we all know we need to do. Because right now, they come out of the general fund. And most communities are progressing to having a stormwater utility such that they can start collecting a dedicated revenue stream. So this year, we would like to do the feasibility study, which would then, develop a committee that would then decide what costs need to be accounted for, how much revenue we're trying to bring in, how much, what the fee structure would be, that type of thing. So that's the idea behind the feasibility study for this year. So that was just a shot from the study from the Resilient Community Partnership showing the impervious area within the city limits of Rehoboth, and then some of the changes in the impervious area over the two time periods, one from back in 2007 and then another one from the most recent data that they used at 2016. And although we didn't, within the city, our percentages didn't change much at all, I think probably because of the codes that are in place and as far as square footage of building lots and those kinds of things. But that's base data that we would need in order to go the next step with the feasibility study. If it's determined that we want to base our rate on pervious versus impervious area, this gives us the data we would need. So it's just more of a continuation based getting the data that we had this past year through that grant and now applying that to develop what we would want to implement as far as a stormwater utility within the city.
I was surprised the change was as low as it was, 3%. Just, I was really surprised about that. And most stormwater utility fees are based on some formula involving impervious coverage, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And I'd like to see it paired with some incentives. I mean, rather than, because it's a tax when you get right down to it. It's going to be another tax,
We can't call it a tax.
for people, for property owners. Well, that's what it is.
It's a fee.
So, it would be nice to be able to, to suggest ways that people could reduce.
Correct.
Conserve and help the environment at the same time.
And if we're able to develop that structure, then, right, we can say, well, if you put a rain barrel in,
Right.
it's worth X number of dollars to you every month. So that's the idea.
In some places, it's really low, like Lewis is what, like $5 or something a month?
That's correct.
So I can't see ours necessarily being that.
There's an interesting story behind that we won't go into today.
Oh, okay.
How
Sorry I
it
brought
is
it up.
what it is.
The Scarborough Extended Rain Garden improvement for $35,000.
So when was that actually initially put in place?
Ooh, pre-Kevin.
15,
2015?
14 or 15.
And so what are the improvements?
So what this project would do, and this is a pretty relevant shot of that rain garden because that's the way it stays for about 3 or 4 weeks after a rain. So it is not working, it's not functioning. And it was just replaced, not replaced, but it was cleaned and new mulch and everything was placed this past year with, I think our contractor did it, but it just doesn't drain. So what we want to do is install an overflow drain in that down very close so it'll still get whatever infiltration we can out of it, but then anything excess of that will flow and it ties into the storm drain. because right now it just sits there. And when the rain garden, as I understand it, when the rain garden was constructed out there were no houses out in that area. So it was really just catching, you know, the runoff of Route 1 that runs down Scarborough Extended. And all the other grass areas would obviously help absorb and soak in all the rest of the water. But now that that's all built up, that whole corner is housing now. It's just exceeds the capacity of that storm drain.
Curious in terms of definitions, why that's urgent, but yet, you know, kind of the Kent, Cookman, Sussex is only essential when it seems to me that's a pretty big issue. I'm not, tell me about your definition of urgent
Typically
versus
for
essential.
stormwater, if it happens to pond, if it drains within about 48 hours, that's kind of the standard of the industry, that,
Okay.
you know, you're okay. You don't really need to implement something. You can, but you don't really need to. I mean, this is weeks sitting out there. You know, it's a frog pond, it's a mosquito bed and all that. Just because it never drains, because within 3 weeks, you know, you've got another rain, it fills back up.
So it's weeks that it sits there, not
Correct.
just a couple days.
Correct.
Got
And much as I hate to admit it, I mean, it was nasty this summer. Really an embarrassment. So that's why to me, it's an urgent need to tie that in.
And when this was first put in, this rain garden, there were those 2 or 3 houses were added there.
Right.
So that kind of destroyed some of that work. The storm sewer assessment and repairs, 200,000, 50,000. So that was cut back considerably.
We took the repair piece out of it, but we want to at least continue with the assessment. So when money does become available, then we can then go fix it.
Where is that? Is that just
Throughout,
general?
citywide.
Citywide, okay, thanks.
So you think we can get away with that without, I mean, with doing just the assessment rather than the repair?
Yes, because we haven't identified, at least with another storm sewer, you know, the collapsing infrastructure like we had on Delaware Avenue with that storm drain. So
was the video inspection the first step, and this is the second step? Basic?
really, the video inspection is the assessment.
But,
so-
but last year, the current year, there was 200,000 for that, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Mhm. And we've done some of that, and we're still doing some of that. So you'll see that continue throughout the winter. What we don't have is an assessment back from whatever's yet to be videoed on something that then shows up going, hey, we need to fix that right now. That would be an emergency. Just because we don't have all those assessments back, we may not have a spot stormwater-wise that we need to. We feel pretty comfortable on the sewer side. There's a spot we need to address right away. And again, this would play into, if we move forward with a feasibility study and establish a stormwater utility, then this would help generate the revenue stream to continue that as we identify the spots that need to be replaced.
Next is the pedestrian safety signage.
Thank you.
50,000.
Right, so what we want to look at here is those 3 uncontrolled crosswalks across Rehoboth Avenue as you come in. So we did a test this winter and kind of deconstructed the one half of the one in front of City Hall to see this. We took the old tape up and we painted it with the reflective kind of paint with the little glass balls in it. By all accounts, it's much more visible for cars as they're coming in and out. So we want to do that on all 3, and then we have these pedestrian crossing signs where the pedestrian can push the button, it'll start the yellow caution lights
On all 3, you're doing
on all
that?
3 of those. And it really is 6 because it's a split road.
Okay.
So you have to do a set on each side.
Right.
And if you've been on the kind of Forgotten Mile on Route 1 there, DelDOT's just recently installed half a dozen or 8 of those along those. But it does enable you, the old adage of, if you step in the crosswalk, you have the right of way, but you take that risk. So this will at least give you the opportunity to push the
Great.
caution light, catch their attention before you step in the
I'm
crosswalk.
this-
very much in favor of this.
Very
I'm glad
much.
to see it.
Yeah. Is this the outcome from Chief's Chief gave us the presentation on various safety issues, and this is the outcome from that? This is the recommended approach?
Yes.
That's great. Thank you. Finally, we did that. Thanks, Chief and Kevin, for working that through and sharing.
And we might, in the future, have to consider this perhaps for King Charles, some
point.
places on King Charles, because maybe that will take care of some of those issues. Something to think about. Anyway,
Great.
Thank you.
The loader refurbishment,
The loaders are workhorse down there. It's the only thing really big enough to do everything. We put forklifts on it, we're hauling, stuff around with it so that we can get some more useful life out of it by doing the refurbishment as opposed to trying to buy new. And I think this is another instance where kind of our whole motor pool operation now is stepped up their game. This would have been a very easy thing to say, well, we're spending a lot of money fixing it, you just need to buy new. The team that's down there now has recommended that we get this refurbished as opposed to buy new. So
Good.
not only are they saving us money on our repair bills every month, but they're also looking out for us long-term with the fleet. So it's very good.
And the same thing, the next one for the beach rake refurbishment.
Okay.
And the electronic fuel pumps, we replaced these, this whole operation 2 years ago, but did not replace the pumps. And now the pumps need to be replaced. The street sweeper,
Our street sweeper now is the brush type, and it's only the brush type. And it's just, unlike some of the other pieces of equipment, it is really pushing us on the maintenance budget. So what we would like to do, in addition to just needing the kind of an upgraded street bank, we also want to get to the vacuum type. We've kind of instituted some of these porous pavement situation. There are areas in the city, we need something that can really maintain those. Right now, the street sweeper can't. It also, the sweeper doesn't do very well at picking up paper, loose paper and
No,
stuff,
it
just gets
doesn't.
kind of clogged in the brushes, where the vacuum is much better way for us here in Rehoboth with what kind of things we're pulling up out of the street.
the next two items, the skid steer and the trailer that carries and pulls the skid steer, these two items we deem to be urgent as a safety issue on the beach access points. So whereas at the beach crossovers, as you're familiar with them, the sand humps, and it's difficult for people to traverse the walkways. We hear numerous complaints during the course of the summer. And the mats that we put down don't address that issue. So DENREC staffing was not always up to par where they could come because we're not allowed to touch anything there. So our guys and other municipalities, Bethany and Dewey, got together with DENREC this past summer, and DENREC now is saying that the city applies for a permit before, when this happens, when the mounding occurs, then the city, individual city, can smooth those areas out. So the skid steer would take care of that issue.
And we currently don't have a skid steer.
Correct.
No. Yes.
Correct.
Yes. And Kevin, you can elaborate, it would be used by other departments as well.
This has a lot of use. We actually, water department, when they were doing the water main replacement on Philadelphia, had to rent one because it's so good at a multi-use vehicle. So
Sure.
not only would it help us maintain the access ways, and DENREC's kind of walking away from them, not as responsive as we would like. This will allow us to do that, rolls right down the access way. It'll also serve each of the other departments as well.
Good.
The roof replacement, you've seen this before, it was deferred last year. It leaked, the roof leaked on the photo on the right is the electrical box there. That was repaired, but it's still leaking. It's, in fear of collapse. It was leaking this past summer, and Billy Maffei, who is in that area in the streets department, so that's something that we consider to be urgent, needs to be replaced. And the roll-off container?
Just kind of a normal cycle for, I think we get about 7 or 8 years out of a particular roll-off container, and we try to rotate one every year or two. Correct. We'll scrap one and
How many do we have right now?
6.
So we'll scrap one, have a new one this year, and it looks like next year you have one. Oh, no, that's funded. Okay.
Continuing on to the parking department, the three items that were funded here are part of the next phase of the replacing the single head meters and with the Luke Cosmo that we did last year, the first phase. These are 48 to be in additional areas of the city.
Yeah, just to provide a little bit more context. So we're proposing a total of 48 pay stations this year. You can see what the pay stations look like in the picture on the left. The picture on the right is essentially a deployment map that I've worked with the parking department as well as other city staff on. The blue icons indicate existing pay stations where they were put this past summer. And then the green icons would indicate the location of next year's pay stations. The red icons would indicate the phase 3. We've temporarily suspended putting pay stations on those locations because as you can see, some of the area includes Lake Avenue and the whole Lake Avenue Phase 2 project. So the thought was to wait another year to implement those pay stations while the new construction takes place. A little bit about the pay station. So they accept the credit cards, Park Mobile, coins. The other benefit to the pay stations that it really provides us with a lot of good back-end data as well. So we have basically a software known as Digital Iris that allows us to go in and we can view real-time information on all the pay stations. It includes the temperature of the pay station, humidity, the transactions by time, the amount of time that was purchased. The back end also allows us to run real-time reports on all the transactions that day, that week, that month, even throughout the whole season. And the parking department uses it multiple times a day as well. As customers call, maybe they experienced an issue or they just need to view the receipt of the actual transaction that took place. We can do all of that.
So how many does this represent?
This would be 48 for next year.
And how many do we currently have?
52, I believe, currently. Are they the same? Same one. Mm-hmm. Exactly, yep. And again, this is really just our effort to sort of streamline and have a consistent parking technology across the entire city.
So it includes the red ones or not?
It would not. So
no,
the
okay,
red
just-
ones would be phase 3, which would be 2 years from now or 2 summers from now.
Okay, well, it says here phase 2 and 3, but.
Right, so, and it would really be phase 2, and then in the 5-year CIP, phase 3, the amount should be identified there.
And we
So
learned
this is
from,
because,
oh, I'm sorry.
excuse me, I haven't used these. They're not pay and display there for the license plate recognition?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, okay, I just wanted to make sure of that.
I see.
We skipped over something on streets. Can we go back there now, or shall we?
We skipped a lot.
Well, I know that, but there's one of them that we talked about boardwalk recycling containers, and I really feel like we need to fund those this year. And so I just want to, I mean, there's, of course, a lot of these things I'd love to see us do that. And of course, there's the stormwater installation, the basin that we were talking about for Kent Street, and it's not funded either. Now, I know it's a big ticket item, but,
Well, I think what we should do, my
Okay.
suggestion would be go through what is funded.
okay.
And then go back, because there is a total of about $1 million that's unfunded. And, you know, if these are things that we want to do, either we replace something that's urgent with something that's essential, or we find some money. And so I think those are the things we got to focus on. But these are, I think we should focus on what is urgent. I
Okay.
think some of these essentials, you know, personally, I think some of these essentials are urgent as well.
Right.
But,
So when you say find money, are we talking about potentially using some of the funds that came in that were parking meter overage, or no?
that's
or
in the
that's-
general fund, and that's something that, you know, is up to the commissioners to discuss, if that's the suggestion of the city manager and her staff. But
We can explain our, you know, how, we can explain that on the expense side.
Sure, okay. I don't want
And,
to,
you know, we're happy to do that, but this is so we literally go over this at least 3 times a week. And we will continue to do that as we did last year with, you know, going back and forth with this. But these are taking that total picture, this is what staff thinks to present to you that are the most urgent based on the needs of the city and the departments who work with them every day.
okay.
And we're not, you know, it's not a popularity contest, but,
I
and then there's the
understand. I
number
just-
also that we have to, so we had to take $50,000 out of the 200 for stormwater. Then we have to play around, well, what do we do with that 150 that we took out? Can we do the Dover Sussex? Can we do, you know, so, and then, you know, Kevin talks to, you know, his department heads, and, I mean, if you don't refurbish this loader, we're gonna have this issue.
Oh, sure, no, I understand. I just wanted to know where we were in terms of conversations about things
Okay.
that have, you know, weren't funded and that perhaps some of us might feel that they should be. Exactly.
Okay.
But with how the mayor wants to proceed is fine by me to go through all the things that have been funded. Yeah, that's good.
Thank you.
And just real quick, Sharon, are you going to have each department head come in like you've done in the past and talk
So
about their particular
We started out with the
budget?
police chief and the city arborist, yes, and
Okay.
subsequent meetings, if Kevin, you know, can't cover something, he'll have one of his folks come in.
Okay, thank you.
The radio replacement and the 911 dispatch chief.
Yeah, thank you. That's just our continued every year trying to, this is a radio replacement, but it's really a portable radio sit inside of dispatch. And we put 3 in for dispatch as well as 3 in the police side. Over the next 3 to 5 years, they can't give us a perfect date on that. They'll no longer support our 5,000, the APX 5,000 radios. We currently have 44 officers that carry those. So we have to upgrade to the APX 6,000. We've already started that. So we try to put this in every year, roughly 15,000, 15 and a half. So we're not getting all of it at the same time, because if we bought all of them, we'd have to come up with about $200,000. So this is just a continued trying to spread the cost out over several years and build our supply up. They're just not being supported, so if one breaks, we can't send it back to the depot to be worked on. They won't supply the parts anymore. And they can't give a specific date because they say when the parts are done, they're done. And that's it. So it could be 3 years, it could be stretched out to 5, but we needed to get on it, so we started last year.
How long do these last?
Typically, because we keep up with maintenance and all that, 5, 6, 7 years, really, they'll continue because as long as they have parts that need to be replaced. And it's like any other thing, they contain TVs and things that keep upgrading. So really, quite honestly, it could even be longer than that normally. I have some old 5000s we're still using. The problem is, once it goes down,
How do you fix it without parts?
and then the next part of that is the state communications that oversees all of it. Once the majority is on 6,000s, they'll quit supporting the 5,000 and we'll be stranded. Won't affect the full-time as much as it will our summer help.
Thank you, Chief. Next, we have wastewater and water, so I'll turn it over to Director of Public Works.
And just to preface a little bit, all of the projects we're going to see on the CIP, on our proposed CIP, had been factored into the rate study calculations. So they're all covered by what we think we've raised with the increased revenue we're going to bring with the rate study. So also in line with what GHD had done with their asset management plan for us 2 or 3 years ago. So we're trying to stick to that schedule as much as we can. So the main pump station out on State Road, most of our effluent, or most of our sewage wastewater flows through that to the plant. Some of the components of that pump station are not working properly, but the real essence of it is the valving out there, so we can bypass and isolate the various mains that come out of there, are not functioning. So we're not able to move flow between the various pipes as we need to. And it's especially critical because as part of the upgrade at the plant that y'all had approved at the headworks, that additional money I came and asked you to do for those priority projects, we can't do those without being able to move the flow back and forth. So timing of this is critical to us as well. But again, it is covered in and was in the rate study calculations. The vac truck, you'll probably remember we had this in last year's budget, but because of the emergency problems we had at mixer number 2 that we talked about a couple of times, we held off on ordering that so that we used really what we had in the budget last year for the vac truck to make those emergency repairs on mixer number 2. So we'd like to put that back into the budget for consideration this year. Similar to the stormwater side, we want to do the video assessment, cleaning and assessment of our collection system. This is just an indication of a continuation of that program. You'll recall that this year we had, I think, $50,000 in the budget. We actually, Evan got us a $50,000 match from the state. So, you know, that's ongoing now over the winter time to do some of that. But it's a kind of a continual program as we'll try to get an assessment of everything and then prioritize where we want to make the fixes.
Will you have a chance to get a match again?
I think so. That particular grant comes out quarterly. I think the issue that we've run into is that we constantly submit for those grants. So right now, we have 3 actually in the works. We're hoping to close out one of them very shortly. We're just waiting for a final deliverable. So hopefully then, with only 2 in the works, they would look to fund our
Yeah, they
our
actually told
application.
us this year that they wouldn't give us, I guess it was on stormwater side.
Yeah.
Service water grant. They wouldn't because we had 2 already.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll not give money out rather than feel like they're,
Well, will you know during this budget process, during, whether some of it, or will you just add to this?
we would still use ours because it's always a, for
Okay.
these guys, it's always a match.
Yeah, okay.
So I think whatever we put in here, we would then be able to, use that
I
as a
see, okay.
match for the grant. So this gives us that flexibility as well.
Okay.
But you can see our lovely root problem in some of our sewers here. Yeah. Sludge pump replacement, we did, I think, one last year. I think we have one in the budget, and this is a second one for that. So our, this pumps the nasty stuff. So
So this is just basically maintaining or improving on deferred maintenance.
correct, that's correct. Like I said, we did the one last year, and this is for another one, for the second one. The air compressor is an interesting story. We had one on our books for a long time. It actually burned up in a fire 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So last year we said, well, we don't know that we use it enough to justify buying a new one. So we actually did a year of let's rent and see if it's cost effective just to rent it each year. It wasn't, unfortunately. So we put it back onto the program this year to go ahead and buy that. Our sewer line rehab program, and as of now, it's kind of an undefined. We haven't picked what sewer main we need to fix. We've videoed the sewer main on King Charles. There's definitely some work there that needs to be done, whether that turns into a big rehab project or we can spot fix or whatever. We're still doing that assessment or analysis as well as continuing with the video. So I have that in there as a placeholder to do sewer main repair once we get all the assessments in and then prioritize where it is we want to actually do that work.
How do you get that number then?
We did a planning factor of how long or how much it cost, to repair a block of a buried infrastructure or 2
So
blocks.
that's what it's based on, is a
Correct. And we got a good, we did the lining this year, which gave us a real good benchmark to use because we actually did almost 2 full blocks at about $450,000. So, yeah,
Okay.
I mean, it's a
So
decent
this
number.
is basically a 2-block kind of increment.
Correct. Mhm.
Pump in a lining?
That's what we would hope. Those are certainly the easiest for the city, I think, if we can do it without digging up the street for, long periods of time. So this is our pump station number 2 out in North Shores. Those pumps sit submerged because the groundwater out there is so high. So they're in need of replacement. So this will replace that, replace the two pumps out there. And that's it for wastewater. And then on the water side, so this is our annual services contract that I talked with you all about several months ago, and renewing that, or not renewing the existing contract and bringing on the new contractor. It saves us a little money. So there's our 2, and it'll get cleaned and repainted in time for the season this year.
Twice a year, right, is what we asked for
Let's
it to
hope
be in
not
the
twice a year. I
contract.
think we got a price to do it each year. Right.
I thought we had talked about doing it twice a year.
The original contract, or the old contract was
Right.
every 5 or 6 years. And then this year, we just wanted to get a price, so if we wanted to paint it each year, we could.
Okay.
This is out at our well number 7 out in Breezewood. And tough to see from the picture, but the picture on the left is the existing caustic storage tanks out there, and you can kind of see the corrosion and buildup around the edges of those canisters. So we need to replace those canisters. And several years ago, they replaced the 2 on the right. So that's just to show you the difference between what they do look like and what they should look like. One of the things that we got, last year we had some grant money and did the facility plan. Our consultant did the facility plan for us on our on our water system. So one of the things that, as a result of that, we're a little concerned about is the water systems out at well 6, 7, and 8. At 8, it's out what used to be old farm fields and has a very high nitrate level. So we treat a certain way out there to help maintain that, but it's still very high. We had a lot of problems with iron bacteria at 6 this year. So one of the things they've recommended is we just look at, is 6, 7, and 8, is that the right mix to have out there? Do we want to pipe it all to 8, increase the treatment at 8 at one place, as opposed to trying to treat individual ones at 6 and 7? So we just want to walk through that and determine what is our best option out there at 6, 7, and 8, because we have to do something. We just don't know what that is yet, because we lost well 6, if you remember, almost the entire summer. So we were a little on pins and needles, because it's a big producer for us. So if we were to do that, we need to know either what we got to institute a treatment system there, or, like I said, consolidate and do one treatment system for all three.
Where are these again?
So 6, the one on the right, top right, is right in the middle of the Breezewood development. So if there's a playground out there, it sits right next to that. 7 is on Old Landing Road at the edge of Breezewood, so almost at the far end of our kind of service area. And then 8 is out almost next to the new hospital complex they're building out off of Warrenton Road, Warrenton and 24. It sits right out there. You probably don't recognize it because you never see the backside of it, because the road's on the opposite side, so that our water department wants to play games with us and show us the back end. I accused them of never maintaining the backside because nobody ever goes there, so I think that's why they sent that picture. Water meter replacement program, we had the first step of that this year. We're doing kind of the North Shores area. I think the city manager briefed earlier today. The pre-con for that is next week, so we'll get that underway. But it's kind of a systematic replacement of our water meters that are all 25, 30 years old and just need to be replaced. And then we'll take another route that we use and then figure out which one we want to move to.
And this is something we're going to be funding for the next several years.
I would
Every
hope.
year.
I would certainly hope,
It'll be
right.
like $500,000 a year then. Okay.
We need a new dump truck. I'm told this might be the oldest vehicle in the fleet. I don't know that for sure, but I'm told it is, and it is in dire need of repair. And then the backhoe, again, another fairly old vehicle, gets a lot of use from the water department and others, and we need a new backhoe. And again, both of those were in the analysis done with the rate study to fund those. And then our water main assessment rehab, what this really is our kind of our replacement program that we've kind of instituted over the last couple or several years, where we try to go out and eliminate the number of 4-inch mains we have throughout the city. And this is just a continuation of that. Maybe either figure out which one we want to do and try to do another one next year. And this is, I think, out on Philadelphia this year that they did. And now we're back to IT.
The IT is an annual replacement of computers from the IT director. He puts this in. And the Lake Avenue streetscape, Phase 2 landscaping for $50,000 goes along with the Lake Avenue streetscape Phase 2 work. So this work is primarily in the triangle and also in the front of the hotel there, that section that's on city property.
Just going back to computer life cycle replacements, how many computers do we have? I mean, how many is he managing?
How many?
Do we know? I'm sure we know, but you may not know right off the top of your head. Like, is it 50? Is it 100? Is it 150?
On the, where?
Well, the computer life cycle replacements, is this, I assume this is citywide, I mean, and for all departments.
Yeah, I don't know the total number of that, but again, they're on a 3 to 5 year cycle. So I think you'll find that in all businesses. There's
Yeah, no, I realize that. I was just curious about how the cycle that we have, is it 3 year, is it 5 year? How did he come up with that? I don't know that I ever knew what
So based on the description I put together for last year's capital improvement plan, we typically have a lifespan of the computers of 3 years. Max replaces our inventory, 1/3 of it approximately every year.
that's what I
So
thought,
last year, I think we had a total of approximately 80 computers. One of the things that he might mention as well is that we started to transition towards dual monitors. His argument for that is that he's seen an increase in productivity from the staff. So that includes roughly 1/3 of the life cycle replacements every year, that amount.
So that totals the $1,932,573. And as I said, we're happy to go back over anything. Just that what follows through, I think Commissioner Schlosser had asked, several times, maybe some other commissioners, about how the public feels. We did do a survey, and I can give you each one of these. So there were 36 respondents who talked about the need for parking, infrastructure, safety, ADA enhancements.
Thank you.
One of the things we've talked about, since you're handing that out, this is great, thank you for doing this. The LED lights on Rehoboth Avenue, is that included somewhere in the budget itself or in the capital, or in the CIP?
Included but not funded.
I'm sorry, I apologize, I just must have missed that.
Is it included in another year in the CIP, or is it here in the capital? I don't see it either.
It's probably in your book.
Yeah, so there are actually 2 sheets. The vertical one is for the capital budget, the funded capital budget for the current fiscal year. And then you'll also see a horizontal or landscape 5-year capital improvement plan. That should be within your CIP tab within the budget book. So that would include all of the funded projects that we currently have for fiscal year '21, and then any of the projects that were unfunded, so we deferred to fiscal year 2022. So it is in the fiscal year 2022 budget.
And 23 and 24, so it's phased in, basically.
Correct.
Okay. Well, thing can be done
Yeah, so it becomes a balancing act, just can we afford? Now, if, we can certainly talk to you about the revenue piece of this and how we are very conservative in what we budget with revenue. Unless, if you desire to change that, that's certainly up to you, so additional projects could be funded.
So Commissioner Schlosser has said she's very strong, feels very strongly about not increasing any fees as far as revenues are concerned. So we're probably, that may not be moving, but at the same time, there's some fees I don't believe that have ever been, and we've all talked about them, but have never been increased, and that's the fees for buses that come in. Has that ever been increased?
Increased a couple of years ago.
No.
I thought they weren't.
I don't know if there are any fees.
There aren't any. Oh,
I don't think we have anything on
other
the
than
books for
parking.
buses.
No, we talked about it and never did it.
Never did it, okay. Yeah, well. so
That's a
it seems like an
distinction.
obvious one.
What's that?
That's a good point.
That seems like an obvious one to do, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why we don't do it. I don't know what Ocean City does or,
We had a discussion on this, and Evan, I don't know if you want to, Evan worked on this with us at one point.
And last year you had a chart of fees, right? Yeah. That you produced.
I believe so, yeah. I think there were a couple different revenue sources that we were looking at.
Right, it'd be useful to have that if you if there's a way to update it. Just take the same chart and update the chart of fees.
but if we're talking about revenue, I think that that's something, maybe you can, Evan, you could address that. You've done it.
Haven't looked at that last year, we can bring it back to you at the next meeting.
Okay,
Sure.
About buses?
yes.
There's $1,500 in there now as projected revenue for buses.
That's probably just the parking in the parking lot.
That's right.
Yeah, we didn't look, I mean, what we had talked about was maybe a per seat fee. And I just remember that it was not as much as we thought it could be. But it would be helpful for the conversation to
To have that
have that,
information.
yeah.
Well, just looking at a couple of things of the unfunded, I know there are several things on here I think we should do. I agree about the boardwalk recycling containers. I think that's very important, and we have a lot of other initiatives that sort of follow on the heels of that, and so I just feel like that should rise to the top.
Yeah, and the family restrooms, I mean, I think
Yes,
that
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 was-
is something that's really important, that is so lacking here. And I know it's not an inexpensive thing, but I think we have to look at
That's been
doing
pushed
it.
off to 2022 on here.
Yeah,
Well, we had a plan for that. We looked at the engineering piece for that, and that all did with the north end of the boardwalk and extending that. What is not in here is the replacement of the tot lot there. You all received a letter from the
Open.
Henlopen condos folks. We did meet with them internally. And of course, they're all in favor of replacing the tot lot but not doing anything else because, and they explained how it would affect their lifestyle. But that's not in here. That didn't make it because, for several reasons. One being that, if we were to do that, we certainly don't have to do everything else that was included there. But the engineering fees that would look into the future for what we could do there, that was a piece that we weren't necessarily able to fund because of, the whole CIP in general.
But doesn't the equipment that's there now have to come out?
Yes,
So there'll be nothing there. It'll just be a
Correct.
blank field.
correct.
it has to come, why is that?
Well, the replacement cost was $250,000 if we wanted to make that park accessible, that tot lot.
Oh, that's the issue. It's not
Yes.
accessible.
Well, that and where, isn't it? Or isn't it like really unsafe or something because of
is.
the age? Yeah. But it's a shame that it has to come out and nothing at all there. Yeah.
So why does that equipment come out and we have a swing set over here in next to Lake Gerard that's probably about 50 years old? Nobody said that has to come out.
Liz, do you want to address the commissioners? This is the oldest park, and this was the most unsafe equipment.
Yeah, so part of when I took over taking care of the playgrounds and all the maintenance, we hired a company to come in addition to the company that actually does the equipment repairs. We have basically a consultant who comes in independently so that they're not trying to sell us something, and assesses the condition of our playgrounds, including the little swing set. And it was found that the Lake Gerard playground, which is the oldest in our inventory, I mean, it was there when I was a child. I mean, we've had upgrades since then, but it's got to be 25, 30 years old, the original, which is well beyond the expected lifespan of a playground. And it was told to us by all three of the people who have looked at our playground, the independent consulting company, our representative through the playground company, and a consultant we had look at some other things who used to work for the Parks Department in Newark, that the amount of rust on that playground is bordering. Now, this was a while ago they looked at it, mind you, since we've been in the works doing all the plans for it, that the amount of rust had progressed beyond surface rust. So you look anywhere and you'll see a little bit of surface rust on a bolt. You probably have it at your own house, right? But this is actually starting to rust entirely through. So just to replace what we already have at the playground, like the entire structure is rusted, it would be, $50,000, $100,000 just to replace what we already have. And then in looking at all that, we have been told that if we do not get not just an accessible playground, but an inclusive playground, and I'll explain the difference in that in a minute, that we will be open to lawsuits. Basically, an inclusive playground, we have ADA requirements, which that playground does not meet. But inclusive takes that a step further in saying that anybody who has a disability can use a certain percentage of the equipment. So the only other inclusive playground in the area is the one up behind the Milford Boys and Girls Club. And if you've ever been there, it has a bunch of ramps, inclusive whirls, so that basically any child can participate and play on the equipment regardless of their ability. And a lot of them are supported. So, a parent, adult can go with the child on some of the equipment. And that relates to the high cost of the playground versus a non-inclusive playground as well. So.
Many people use that. Have you, before we make any investment there, and again, I'm not a child hater. I love children, okay? I love children. I want children to come to our town. I want them to have fun. I want access to all children, inclusive and access, just to be clear. But how many people actually use that? I walk by there every day in the summer. I think one time I saw a mother come in with her child. One time.
Somebody said that to me the other day. So we go to the park weekly to service it, and I'd say at least 50% of the time we have to come back. And I go there several times a day because my parents live around the corner.
Okay.
And God, there's somebody there this weekend in the rain. So, and
Fair
just
enough.
thinking geographically,
Yeah.
I do think about this stuff that geographically, it's a very well-situated playground. So it covers our entire boardwalk, all of the northern section of the Pines, Olive, and Maryland. And then we have Grove, and then on the other side, we have Stokely, which are probably, when that comes up for replacement, might be more of a question mark with the new Rehoboth Elementary playground. Oh, thanks. Is that the design of the playground?
Yeah, so this is a conceptual design that we had the,
Thanks, Chief.
thank you. And our contractor we use all the time, they're on the state contract list, so we wouldn't have to bid this out. And this is accessible and inclusive.
And how much, that's 250?
250,000.
Now, the 250 is not taking into account in the past every playground we've done, we've gotten grant funding through ORPT.
Well, that's what I was just going to say.
But I don't, to rely on that, and we had to scale this down too from what we originally wanted, to be honest. There were some cost-cutting measures we took in there. And then also the original Lake Gerard, if you look, and the other parks are the same, there's listed donors, so we also had quite a few private donations for all the playgrounds. Not that we can depend on that, but, it could help with the funding.
And we do get requests all the time throughout the summer especially now that we have the no tent on the beach, that families do come with children and, you know, certainly adults who, you know, there's nowhere to go for them, nothing accessible. In talking to the Henlopen and Condo group that we staff met with, they said that their grandchildren use it, and they take their grandchildren down there. They didn't want to see this go away. And Liz, I know, has commented that, you know, whenever she's down there, she sees some use out of it. So I don't know to quantify that, Commissioner Schlosser, but, you know, like all our other parks, and I think, you know, Liz can tell you, she was a frequent user of this at a very young age. So, and this was the first, right?
Yeah, lots of temper tantrums from my brother, sister, and I when we were children, and mom said no. So, yeah, it was the only one for a long time. I mean,
Sure.
and it's by far the smallest and the least fun now. And I think that's why you do see a little bit less usage than, say, Stokely or Grove, which has the farmers market, attracting a lot of people there too. It's just the smallest and most outdated, so.
And I would also think that if it's 25 years old, some families, some parents are a little, I don't know if I want my children to use something that they might hurt themselves on.
Sure.
And again, if you look at the Stokely Park or you look at Grove Park or you look over at the school, and it's amazing how many people are involved in those parks. And I think it's just probably just the location, or not the location, but the situation with the equipment itself.
So we need to get some of those grandmothers over there in Henlopen to start doing fundraising to help pay
Yeah,
for these things.
I mean, because the same company we used did the playground at the elementary school, and it was basically the double this price. So just know that we did our best with cost savings, but
Yeah.
to get what we need and what the residents and visitors expect, this is at a minimum, you know, and there's no in between, right?
So who will make as far as ORPT, trying to get a grant there, is that something in the works presently?
No, I mean, if this were to be included in the budget, then we would, they want to see it, you know, that it's funded.
And I would want to see a grant application before we put it in the budget, so, I mean, it's,
I don't think grants work that way. I don't
Well-
think they say, hey, oh, you're gonna do that? Here's some money. I think they do it like, how much money are you gonna put in?
Well, Evan and I have met about it briefly, and because it's inclusive, there are other grant sources. Now, how likely you are to get one of those, I think that would take a little bit more research on his part, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very similar to the Jolly Trolley situation. I think, you know, if it's something we want to do, we got to bank on 250. And if we can get away with only having to pay 100 because we get 150 in grants or donors, that's great. But I think, you know, getting 50% would be phenomenal.
So,
Yeah.
From a number of different sources.
So are we actually going to remove the current equipment?
Well, it's going to cost money to demolish everything too.
Well,
so.
that's, I mean, my concern being is if it's really that unsafe and we're opening ourselves up to lawsuits, and we
Yes.
better get the doggone thing removed.
Yes, we're removing it.
Okay.
Did you, by any chance, when you got the drawings and whatnot from Mike about the whole project, did you get a price estimate from him on that, on the entire project?
For construction?
Yeah, I mean, construction and.
It was all conceptual, pretty much,
Yeah.
wasn't it?
The only
Okay.
price we got was for, it's conceptual, yeah.
I mean, I mean, I still think that project is a viable project to consider. I mean, there may be some things that we want to put in or take out from there. But if we're going to have to replace the children's equipment sooner rather than later, we may want to think about something that we could.
Well, it sounds like it's being removed, so
Yeah, no, I
there'll
know.
be nothing there, so
we
we
have
might.
to replace it right
put
now.
something in
Doesn't mean we have to
there for the
replace it.
future, not
Yeah.
just as a replacement, but what do we think about
No,
the
I
project?
agree. I mean, I think that we needed to think a little bit more about, you know, as
the
far as
road.
yeah, down the road. I mean, as far as the presentation that was made, I wasn't, I mean, I didn't embrace the whole thing, but I mean, the whole concept, the
Well, it's good to
concept
look at it
was
globally. Yeah,
nice,
yeah, it's
idea.
nice to be able to look at the
So,
entire-
you know, how we fund this is another thing, because it's, unfortunately, it's not gonna be inexpensive.
No, it's not.
Were there a lot of requests in the CDP survey? I just can't remember, for playgrounds? I don't remember really reading about many. I'm just curious what the public, you know, in general.
I don't know if I'd be the best person to ask
Yeah.
about that. I remember there was quite a lot of support for the natural environment, and
Yes,
parks
there
and
was,
recreational
definitely.
opportunities.
There was, and I wonder if that was part of it, thinking about the playgrounds too.
Yeah, I mean, just think of yourselves. If you think about a park, you think about a playground, right?
I think about a dog park, but that's probably just me.
Well, yeah, that is
And
a very,
trees and,
it is a very common amenities most
Okay.
cities provide now, dog
that's fair.
parks.
Got it, okay. Yep, thanks.
And one other thing on here, it's a small item, but I'm going to ask about it because for one thing, something was done last year, and then I see it's gotten pushed off to 2022, and I was very disappointed, and that was the speed cushion for Henlopen. So that got pushed off to, right? Didn't I see that somewhere on here in 2022? What number is that? Yeah, Henlopen Avenue, line 47.
yeah.
And the amount is given as 12,500, and the speed cushions that were in last year's CIP were 8,700, and I assume those were the ones on Columbia?
Correct.
And
And
are there one or two of them, remind me, on Columbia?
I think it was just one.
Just one.
And how did, I mean, I wasn't part of the budget meetings, I wasn't part of it. How did all that come about? Were there police reports of a lot of speeding there? Was it a request okay. I'm just curious.
That began from a request from a citizen on Columbia Avenue that started with a petition, and then he had several meetings with city manager and I. He brought neighbors in and was complaining about just speed in general. And even though there really wasn't an issue with speed per se, I mean, at different times you might get one spike up, but for the most part under. A lot of children were in the area he was concerned about, so he was putting his own cones out in the sidewalk or flags up saying, slow down, children at play, and stuff. And so there was enough of that. We didn't do anything right away, and then he reached out to DelDOT, and we had meetings with DelDOT about it, and they came up with some things that they were doing independently, putting these speed cushions, and that kind of calms traffic down. That's how we got involved in that.
Because a request has come from several homeowners on Henlopen, and I mentioned this to Sharon a couple months ago. And so one question, I guess, is why would they now be 12,500, whereas the one on Columbia was only 8,700? And why is it getting pushed? I mean, it's this, you know, people tell me it's the speed, it's that it's just, they're just as fast on Henlopen
As far
they
as the
are.
price, obviously each year there's a small increase, but what ended up happening is originally we were going to have Public Works put the mats down.
Yeah.
It came more complicated. They didn't have the manpower or the tools in order to do that, so it had to be contracted out, and that added to the price.
So it ended up being more
It
than what was
ended up
budgeted.
being more that was budgeted, yes.
Yeah, so the 12,000 number reflects approximately $3,500 for installation, which was based on the quote from last year.
Difference.
And Chief, can you tell us, I know you've put up those speed radar things, stands on both Columbia and Henlopen over the years. I mean, is it much different, Columbia versus Henlopen on those? And I know it's like 95% of the people or more are not speeding.
It hasn't. What ends up happening is with the bike trails and all that, there's just more people walking, bicycling, strollers on Henlopen in Columbia, but now they're, because of the speeds and how Columbia is, people are starting to go more over to Henlopen, and that's how our bike trail comes through the park and off Surf Avenue. So even though there may not be 30 miles an hour, they may be 25 or under, it's just getting to the point that it's almost too fast for the conditions. So somebody may not be speeding, so our information's not telling us there's a lot of speed issue per se, but it's like several of our streets in town, it's just the conditions warrant in the middle of summertime that you probably should only be going 15 miles an hour down there. So if you're sitting on your porch, you're walking, or you're pushing that baby stroller or bicycle, and you're like, oh my God, that car's flying, and you really look at it, and they're only going 25, 26 miles an hour. But it is a perception, if you're not doing radar every day, that a car looks faster, especially if you're standing there and, you know, you have small children. So I don't know if I answered that,
So
but.
it sounds
but
like it's needed to me.
So,
given what
I
you
will
just
sit there
described.
and say, the stop signs and things have helped.
Yeah.
The added stop signs, we've had several compliments, from homeowners in that area. So I don't want to dismiss that because I know it's, has played a important part on that.
So, thank you very much. I'm sure I'm not alone in this observation, but everything in this CIP is infrastructure related.
Yeah.
Everything, which we need. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, we need to do that. But none of the things that we all have been talking about over time is in here. So where is the money coming from to do that? We're talking about, upgrades to the chairs in the convention center. We're talking about recycling bins for the boardwalk, family restrooms.
Yeah.
Potentially funding Jolly Trolley.
Right, and none
I
of it's
mean,
here,
none of
right.
this is in here.
Right.
And I'm not being, I don't mean to be critical, I'm not being critical. What I'm saying is, seems to be what we can afford to do based on our revenue stream. So either A, we find revenue from some other place, or we figure out, hey, that money that came in from the parking meters, is there some way of being able to tap that funding? So I don't know, but I mean, I'm
There's a
just,
C, I'm sorry, there's a C, Pat, that I want,
What?
but
What's
there's
that?
a C, and it is continuing to look hard at city expenses. So, for example, sorry, Kevin, but you're here, so I'm gonna continue to pick on you. And one, so we're hiring 2.5 man years worth of work, right? So 1 full-time person and 3 part-time, but yet we're also increasing our contract services. I mean, and our professional services. So, and maybe there's a reason, but I'm wondering if we give another hard look at our expenses. So there's 3 things we can actually do: more revenue sources, use some of the proceeds, and or look at expenses. Maybe we have. I'm just saying that is an
sure,
option.
no, yeah.
It's an option.
I hear you.
So sorry, keep going with your.
No, that was it. I mean, I was just pointing out that this is all infrastructure and all the things that we, as commissioners, look to as far as servicing our tourists and our residents and the things that we think are important in terms of the future of our city aren't here. So where do we, it's a big question mark for me. It's like, where do we go? You know, I'm all about getting grants, and I'm good at trying to find money for the most part. I mean, I will walk out there and talk to the Senator Lopez and try for CT funds, et cetera, but still, how are we going to fund these things that I feel that are really important that we do?
Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating to see great presentations like the one this morning and to think, well, that was nice, and then not be able to do anything with it.
And things like, too, the street vacuum, I mean, the street vacuum's not perfect. Is it gonna break down tomorrow? I don't know. I don't know enough about it, but do we really need to spend $100 and whatever it was in there, $70,000 as an urgent funded requirement for that when we, may need other things or want other things for our community. So I guess, is it that you want to hear from us now, like we have the commissioners have a consensus that these maybe 3 or 4 things need to be included in the budget, and then you would, in the capital plan, let's just go for that now, and then you would go back to the group and figure out how to get those in and what you would cut to get them in? Is that where we are in the process? So like for me, I mean, the chairs in the convention center are a pretty big deal. I mean, and really, that convention center generates, I think it's generated $90,000 worth of revenue this year. So to me, it's a zero-sum game if you take that revenue and, use it to buy new chairs, that just makes sense. I mean, to bring more people in, that brings more revenue in, et cetera. So for me, I would like to see that funded this year. And I'm sure everybody has something they would like to see funded, for the betterment of hospitality, of safety, of infrastructure, whatever our priority is.
So certainly, so we do this every year.
Yep.
This is the layout here. This is what we presented. Now we can go back and take another look at it. Bert and I can look at the revenue generated. We can maybe be a little less conservative, although that's, but we can take a look at that. Again, it's a balancing act. We just, if we remove the skid steer and the trailer for the skid steer and the roof replacement, I'm just choosing, then we could put back the recycling, and we could put back, something else. We could not do the, for almost $450,000, we can keep the single head meters in place. That's a big chunk of money that we could use elsewhere.
A little bit of Washington Monument budgeting, but does anybody know what that is? It was big in the, okay, anyway, I won't get into it, you can look it up. But are those really the things that cut, I mean, if we said we wanted certain things really included as a consensus group here in the commissioners in the budget, so I don't know, I think you're just giving examples,
Well, I
right?
hear what you're saying, but
Okay.
they're operational items. So, for Kevin to tell Mike, we took the loader out, because the convention center needs chair replacement or whatever. I mean, not.
Sure, no.
Again, that's just what these are the operating expenses, these are the priorities that, staff has advised, this is what they need to make the city run, to make the engines run, to keep the streets clean. Yeah, it is a lot of infrastructure. That's the mantra we're continuing to, to hear.
Been ignored for so
Maybe-
long, so.
Yeah, maybe what
Everything
we
is
should
needed.
do is, as commissioners go down the unfunded piece first, and see what can be picked out, and point towards the city manager. And then the other unfunded things that have been pushed off in the future, and see what it adds up to.
Okay.
I mean, like, for example, if we go down, I think we're okay on the sewer assessment and repairs, doing the 50. I know you'd like the 150, but you put it off, so that's fine. But something like the boardwalk recycling containers, that sounds like something people want.
Are the chairs?
Where
Like
are the
there's
chairs?
folks
At the
there at the
very
very
top.
top. I know that's,
top
we're
of-
making it sound
Oh,
like
oh,
it's
I
a
see.
ridiculous thing, but it's a thing that brings revenue to this town, and that's what we need, is new revenue.
What'd you say the revenue was?
So
No question.
it's somewhere in the 85,000.
it's about-
And that's
It costs
just,
something to run it.
Yeah.
I don't know how much it costs
yeah,
to
well,
run it.
that's already calculated in the other, into the budget as well.
Well, I think that's something that's, is spending 77,000 gonna take that 90,000 and make it 200?
Maybe.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you looked at the chairs that 77,000 buys, and it's not much different than what's there.
That's not what our committee said, but
No, no,
anyway,
oh, did you see the chairs?
I didn't see them, but I'm trusting the committee
They're gonna be
to
presenting
do
on
that.
this, right? We'll
That's
learn
right.
more.
We'll learn more.
You'll learn more of that, because I think, I agree with Commissioner Gay, it's like, that 90,000, that's great. And we can probably depend on 90, maybe 100, maybe more each year. But there are other things that run the convention center. So by spending that 77,000, what are we getting included? And that's what I look at it from capital things. How long will that last? Is that gonna produce more revenues? That's typically, in a business, what you do is you look at something, okay, I'll spend this because it's gonna give me more. And I'm not saying this isn't gonna give us more, but does this match up with the recycling cans? Does this match up with Jolly Trolley? I think what we have to do is pull these out, and that's what I just said, is, you pull out the recycling, pull out the chairs, maybe we go down the list and see what's unfunded And then, take the things that maybe are pushed off to 22 or 23 and see what that adds up to. And then lay it on the city manager
Saying
and
come
see
back
where
to the
that.
next meeting with that kind of homework
But
done?
let's see what it adds up to
what it is
today.
now.
I
think
can
is what
right
he's
now
saying, yeah.
go down my list.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
So I'd start at the top then. I mean, I would like to see, I mean, not just me, and this is
The
talking to a
chairs.
lot of folks, the
yeah.
chairs. So I think a lot of folks would come to consensus on that. So,
chairs and
Recycling.
recycling,
containers.
agree.
And I think we need to, family restrooms, maybe that's not on
So
that
we're looking
page.
at things that
where's-
might
that
have
could
been
push to
deferred to 2022,
2022.
as well as things that are on here as
Yeah,
unfunded.
so let's go down this one.
Sorry,
And then let's go to
okay.
22.
Okay, yeah.
All
Just
right,
so
sorry,
it's not
sorry,
confusing.
sorry.
All right, so
Okay.
we got the sheet, the chairs, the recycling.
It's not funded.
Is it something we think should be? I mean, I know that's.
So you really have to look in your
Yeah.
notebook, because there's a lot of things that aren't included.
Yeah, no, we'll go
That-
to that because we're almost done.
Yeah, we're,
Um,
so that's about it.
Well, so
Recycling
the
bins.
access mats, are we talking about the mats that go on the beach? I mean, we usually can get those easily funded.
That's paid for, we can get, let's go back to the sheet.
All right.
Um,
I am.
Chairs, recycling bins, what else?
Let's look at this Lake Gerard tot lot, and I'm not saying let's go spend 250, but if we take down the playground tomorrow, and it's just an empty lot there, there's gonna be a lot of backlash.
That's true.
So should we think about a project like this, and put it on the books, and then go out and try to get grants and whatever to hopefully get to somewhere close to half?
Well, I think we skipped over something too. I mean, I feel very
Wait, can we-
strongly.
Let's operate from the sheet inside our book, because this
okay.
other one does not include
Yeah, I was
all of the
using this one.
deferred and
Okay,
things.
got it.
And, yeah.
Okay. That's fine with me.
Horizontal. Yep,
So we've identified three things on the vertical sheet here, right? Three
which,
things.
yeah, which is on the other sheet as
Yeah, I know.
well.
Con-
just-
Convention, the chairs, this recycling containers, and something at the tot lot, whether it's this project or not. Okay.
So then was missing, which is on this sheet, is the Baltimore Avenue restroom. I don't know that 120, if that's the one that's family restrooms or what that number is, but I think we need to do it. 13? Mm-hmm.
So for the Baltimore Avenue facility, that's the design cost to design, because it's that's a second level. It's a much more
Okay.
in-depth design.
So
To design it, not to
maybe-
do it?
Correct,
So
correct.
maybe what we need to do is look at a different way of approaching this, is what does it take to add on a family restroom at, whatever comfort station seems appropriate, or two, I don't know.
I kind of think that's what's in these two numbers.
Is that what
120
it
and
is?
640 is,
Yeah, so the Delaware Avenue one is because it's less involved. It's just construction around the outside of the facility, adding the changing rooms and the family restrooms. So that's a design and construction number,
I see.
640,000.
So that would be done first. The Baltimore is just the design.
Got it.
And to just like piecemeal it, I'm not sure if you want to do that.
Okay,
So
well,
they did a
you
whole
tell me, I mean,
design
you say
of-
that's a dumb idea to piecemeal it, I'm good with that. I
Yeah.
trust your, what you're saying there, so that's fine.
And I just want to point out the recycling containers come with the,
Comes with a vehicle, whether you go back to a new
one
a
electric
Polaris or one of
vehicle.
the electric
Yeah.
vehicles, right? So
so that's additional monies, it's just not the recycling
15 and
container.
80.
plus.
I'm lost. What number are we on?
You see the recycling down there, the 15, which is number? 29. Yeah, 29,
Oh, okay,
recycling, and then the 80,000 right below it.
okay.
So in reality, to do one,
Yeah, and it'd be
You
one
gotta
of
do,
those,
no, okay.
one of those
You have to do
vehicles,
the 15 plus the 80,000.
plus 40 of that.
40.
40.
vehicles too.
Right, one for recycling, one for regular trash, but we deferred both
Okay,
of
well,
those.
that,
and
that
gonna-
helps too, to just narrow that down to 40,000, just if we're trying to look at this.
I'm sorry, so,
So you have to do the vehicles when you do the containers, is what you're saying?
Yes,
Right.
Correct.
one vehicle.
Except instead of 80,000, it's 40,000. So then the access mats, I believe, should be put back in here, because I do believe that we can get the funding for those. So I think we should put it in the budget, because I think we can get a grant for that, or,
Yeah, I think we can get those paid. I don't know that we want to say, not put it in the budget. I agree with you, maybe we put it in the budget. And I honestly believe that if we still have that skid machine up front, that some of those dune crossings won't even need the pads, because a lot of that is because some people have problems getting up on the sand. But if you can get up and over on the pads, it works. But if the sand is at a lower level, it makes a lot of difference. But
You want to take that out, Mayor?
what, the skid thing?
Yes.
No, no, I was saying, yeah, that, I think that'll help.
Okay.
Not need as many,
Okay.
mats, but I think these mats I'd put in, suggested, but I think we can get those paid for 100%. He's already offered,
right.
but I don't know that we should.
I also would like to see somehow with the moving the stormwater basin for the Kent, Cookman, Sussex. I don't know why Dover's on there, but it's the Kent, Cookman, Sussex area is pretty high priority. Pat and I both brought that up, and it's in a lot of the different surveys. And you use, Kevin, your criteria of 40 over whatever 48 hours of standing water. There's been 4 days of standing water on Kent and Forth particularly. So I would like to see somehow that get funded in the 2021 budget.
But wasn't part of that, Kevin, a timing situation? As far as the study would take so much time to do, and then to come up with what the solution should be?
Correct, so they did the preliminary study this year, so they've done the surveying and that kind of thing. So for that 220 number, that's design over the summer, construct next fall would be that sequence.
Design over the summer coming.
Correct, this summer, and then build it next year.
Next fall.
This fiscal year, but in the fall.
And
Would it make sense to get the design and done this year and then put
We-
the other one off to?
We
2022?
asked him just the opposite last time. There was a consensus to have him combine and accelerate it, because it's become a pretty big issue with that standing water in that area.
I think there's standing water in probably 3 or 4 other places around town that have been sitting there for 10 years as well. I know there's one.
I don't
3
hear
blocks
anybody
from-
advocating for that, so I do hear a whole bunch of people coming in on surveys, and 2 commissioners at least feeling pretty strongly that this is an issue here. So if there's other issues like this, please bring them up.
But that's, all of a sudden, you're talking 3 and 4 times that amount of money.
We'll bring it up. I mean, what are the other priorities? I don't know.
Because I've told these people, we'll get it done when we get it done.
Well, we've been saying that for 10 years over in that area, the
I
Cookman,
think
Sussex
we've been-
do.
Unfortunately, we've been saying it
Yeah.
all over town,
I know.
and we're getting a lot
So we got to
done.
start somewhere.
And I think that's what's being done. But I'm open to suggestion there.
moving down, because that's such a big number, we'll need to come back and talk about that, I think, in detail, the whole situation with Kent and Sussex, but,
Wait, what did you say about it?
I said that's such a big number compared to everything else that we're talking about right now. I think we need to talk about it some more, but let's go down. Because
Sure.
I can only be here for another 5 hours, okay?
I have all night. Happy to talk about it.
No, the Henloop, so what I was just going to say is the Henlopen Avenue speed cushion, that's not a high, I mean, it's a high priority for residents, and the things that people bark about the most are some of the things that I feel like we should try to do, and this one seems like it would be sort of low-hanging fruit, of what I would consider low-hanging fruit. that we should include that. So I have a question about going back to something that is funded, the roll-off containers. I know it sounds like we have 6, and we would get rid of one and get a new one. It's like, do we really need to do that this year? I mean, it's $7,000, I realize, but every little bit helps, so that's to you, Kevin.
I mean,
The roll-off
what
container.
would you like to replace that with?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you really need to, does one need to be junked right away? I mean, where are we with that? That's what I'm trying to ask, I guess.
All right, so in all honesty, I think when we did our analysis, we had about 7,000 left to go. Okay, what do we have? What can we plug in there, that's 7,000? Because it's obviously not going to come up to a nice round number. Could we defer that a year? Certainly. If you got something you want to trade
Yeah.
for that 7,000?
Well, it's 7,000 goes towards, perhaps the speed cushion, or,
Okay, we can do that.
I mean, I hate to do this
Well, I don't
nickel
think
and
we're doing
diming,
that
but I don't
right.
know how else to do it.
Hey, Pat, real quick, I thought the purpose of this was to go through and identify what we would like to see included.
Okay, you're
Not to
right.
negotiate now, I mean,
Okay,
because
okay.
and I think that should include big ticket and not big ticket,
Got
and
it.
look at trade-offs. But I'm happy to do it another way.
No,
I thought that's what
fine.
we were
That's
doing.
exactly what the mayor had suggested.
So,
My fault.
Okay.
I think, unless you want
Mea
to
culpa.
identify more, we hear what you're saying. Like I said, we'll
Yeah.
go back to how we budgeted revenue, which we do quite conservatively. We'll see if we can change that at all. And anything else that we think on the priority list.
Well, I really would love to see the Jolly Trolley. I mean, I know that's a big ticket item, and I do believe we can get some funding for that, but I'd like to see that added back in.
Is that on a line?
I just looked up Lisa and answered.
I
your
don't think it's
question
on a
about the
line at all, but I'm adding it.
Yeah. In answer to Commissioner Schlosser's question about how important play areas are, so in the CDP survey, and what I did was looked at the category, the answer that was extremely important in the category, and the answer that was very important, and added those together. And over 80% thought that public and outdoor recreation was extremely or very important, and 76% thought that recreation and play areas are appealing aspects of the city.
No, I agree.
Yeah, it was up there with all the other kind of natural park kind of stuff.
Are there other ones?
Well, I think so are you
Well,
suggesting
I thought we checked it off from the, I thought we sort of checked it off on the other one, didn't we? It's one of the things for them to look at anyway. right?
Anything else? That, I guess, is the question.
I just need a clarification question then, for you and your team, Sharon, on the LED lights. Where is that on here? Okay, it has LED retrofit is pretty hefty, but then it says street light pole replacements. The reason I'm bringing this up is just if you look up kind of at the light post, it's the part that extends the arm it's just chipped and in disrepair. It really brings the city down aesthetically, in my opinion. So could you actually just replace those without doing the whole retrofit project right now?
So the street light pole replacements are for the 2 that were run into by vehicles this year.
Oh, got it.
So those are the concrete ones along the sidewalk lights.
Oh,
So we had a stockpile of, emergency replacement types. We used both of them. So this was, do we want to have a stock of one here so we can replace it in a week as opposed to ordering one and shipping it in and replacing it in a month?
okay, I see. Okay.
We thought we'd rather wait a month and save 12 grand.
So is there any option to do something with those light heads on Rehoboth Avenue to improve the aesthetics if we determine, and as much as I'd like to see them replaced, I'm not sure that I would say that's a priority at $200,000, but is there something we can paint them or something in the interim?
Powder coating or whatever it was.
So one thing that I'll add is the teardrop fixtures on the avenue, specifically within the median, those LED retrofits actually are a complete replacement. So we wouldn't be able to just replace the bulb within it. So the quote that we received was actually for the fixture itself as well as the arm to be replaced. I think there's probably some potential to, especially on the sidewalk lights, probably spray paint some of those to fix the paint chipping on those. But in terms of the avenue, I guess it's just, a question of whether or not we want to send somebody up in the bucket truck to spray those center island poles. I don't know that it warrants taking them down and having them send in and powder coating those fixtures if the goal in the future is to completely replace them with LED retrofits.
You know, there's a thought that we talked about before that we could look towards the future, and I'm not saying the future tomorrow, I'm saying for the next 20 years. With technology changes in G5 and 6 and whatever it's going to, we could conceivably sit down with these outside contractors, Verizon, ATT, whatever, come up with a plan for everything in the median and Rehoboth Avenue to allow them to put up antenna, but come up with something and they pay for it.
We've been I know Sharon's working on that plan.
no,
I think
but
it got derailed from the budget.
No, but what I'm saying
I
is.
agree.
It's something that we'd have to approve them coming in and proposing something to us. I mean, I think right now, everybody wants to talk about aesthetics and having somebody else bring in ideas isn't necessarily where everybody wants to be. But I think we can probably make a little bit of money, and we can also get a number of those replaced, because I think we could probably sell space on 20 of them easily.
Because we already have a small cell on what, one or two
Two
of them?
Two of them, but I mean.
Did they replace those poles when they did that, do you know?
Yeah, they put brand new ones. And so if we had every one of them the exact same,
Yeah.
we
5G all
maybe,
the way, huh?
yeah, maybe we could get somebody else to pay for them. It's just an
Right.
idea.
I brought that up months ago, and that's why I keep asking, what is the plan? And then, for the install of the 5G
Well-
antennas, so that we can sit down and work with the providers and see if they are willing to go ahead and replace the
Oh,
current light posts with the antennas.
I think the group up here has to say, go ahead and agree that whatever you bring and we approve works.
Yes,
but-
but we need the plan first.
But we have to say that this is what we want.
So the first part of that
Okay.
plan is the infrastructure on the boardwalk. And we did go to Verizon and AT&T and say, if you're going to, now I forget how many there were, if there's 100 light poles and you only want to, AT&T, put up 25, Verizon's going to come down the road and want to put up their 25, I am requesting that you, AT&T, and Verizon pay for all of the light poles
So that they're consistent or something.
and not put the guts in, if you will, but so they're looking symmetrical.
Yep, and then
It's even better.
they offer them out to other providers?
Well, they're.
Or the city offer
They're
them.
not, they're pushing back on that.
Costs money. And,
Try it, yeah. I think it's
Well,
great.
but we can't say no according to our new ordinance and the FCC regulations and,
sorry, I got off
Those are
track.
impact fees, that's what's, right? I mean, that's what it is an impact fee. And
it
that's-
is, yes.
Yeah, and I think
All right, I apologize for getting off.
No, that's all right.
No, it's a good point, though.
Where was the LED things which line were you talking about?
43.
I'm not 100% like, oh my gosh, we need to spend that money, given all these other priorities.
Okay, all right, then that's not on the list. Anything else? Okay,
what is the timing on the construction of the canal dock? I know the bids are being opened on Wednesday, but
I think it was proposed that February 1 was the start date for construction,
when's it
right?
finished?
If it.
Depends.
As soon as possible.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it could be as early as this time next year.
Okay, so it would take almost a year to build it.
I would think you'd have to put it there. It might be,
And there's a
months.
modified schedule during the summer months.
Right, yeah, okay.
That's part of it. Although, well,
you never know, but.
yeah, you don't, we'll see on the 8th what
What they propose.
they
right.
propose.
Yeah.
But February 1 is the proposed start date.
And do we know what the ongoing maintenance cost is? I know, I heard you say last spring at the RBHA meeting that it was minimal in terms of landscaping,
It
but,
is minimal, and I don't remember right now, but it's minimal.
and that won't be factored in because it really won't be
I think it
an issue till
includes,
the next.
I think it includes 2 years of
Oh, does it?
maintenance
Oh, great.
costs.
Okay, the bid includes
2 or
it?
4.
Oh, okay.
I think,
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I think the
Okay.
the higher price had,
yeah,
That's great.
I think initially included 2, and then we asked Matt to include an additional 2 or 3 years.
Okay,
Yeah, so it's included.
okay.
in the higher price.
Just real quick, Kevin, on the vertical or horizontal sheet, there's Barrett Avenue stormwater improvements, construction phase 1 and 2. I thought are we doing that now, or are you still recommending that be deferred?
No, that, we want to keep deferring that.
Well, you want to keep deferring it? Okay.
Really? That's where I live.
Oh, I wouldn't say that's
Oh,
why, but.
sorry.
Oh, well, I think, okay.
That's okay.
Sorry, I don't know why I'm hung up on this. I think it's because I sit in the caucus room and look at these chip lights all the time. But anyway, on the LED retrofits, could you do it in a more phased approach, like do first block Rehoboth, then second block Rehoboth the next year, and third block? Like if you did it that way, would it then end up to be less than what's in here? I mean, where you could do it over a 5-year plan or something. Is that even
Right,
worth it? Just
so
a
the way it's
thought.
broken out now
Yeah.
is by type. So one of those, and I forget which order, I think we did
The Center Island.
Center Island
medians
first, then the
Sidewalk.
sidewalk ones, and then the boardwalk ones. So that's how that's phased. Could you break it into more phases? Certainly. Do 2 blocks of Rehoboth, 2 blocks of Rehoboth, and that way. So you would pay less each year, but you'd probably pay more over the course of the
Okay, I
5 or
see.
6 years.
All right,
Because more mob fees, more price goes up each year, that kind of thing.
because they're coming back again and again.
Yeah, so it'll be a little more total, but a little less each year.
And then, are you gonna, just real quick, but it's your question, so you could,
My question? What?
yeah, your original question about the surplus and the parking and what we did with it.
Yeah.
Do you want to discuss that now? It was your question, so I just,
Yeah, no, I mean, I do want to
I'd
understand.
just like to understand it.
$1 million that went, I guess, into the general fund, yeah?
Right.
So that's
In the bank.
good, in the bank, it's in the bank. I mean, do we want to take any money out of the bank?
We took 300 out already, right, just about, for this merge.
So, yes, correct. So Bert, Commissioners just asked about the surplus, $900,000 in the meter revenue. So that money, if you'd like to explain, some of it was used, I guess it wasn't earmarked, and try to make this as concise as possible, so potentially the Director of Public Works can get a good idea of what that means also. So we've been dealing with that.
I know he's had his hands in there for it, I know that, for sure.
Let me, I'm not surprised this question's been asked. When revenue comes in, it's just like your business. If you have sales in your business, I mean, you don't really can't identify each component of the sales where it's going to go. It goes into your sales. And this particular surplus that we had, that money comes in, it goes into our operating account with the rest of our revenue. And unless we've restricted it, which we haven't, and we have a lot of restricted revenue, it's not necessarily sitting in a bank account. That money could be anywhere on your balance sheet. It could be in your receivables. It could be anywhere. It's just a piece of revenue that comes in. Now, I understand that what many people think is, well, we took in more took in more parking revenue than what we budgeted, so we should have that available to spend. And it sounds logical, but I mean, as far as say, well, is that money restricted any place? No, it's not. It's just part of our assets. And can you make a case that we encumber prior year revenue, which is our essentially prior year fund balance? Yes, we've done that in recent years, and we've gone ahead and said, well, we don't really have an item, a specific revenue item that we can identify, but we can say that we did have a surplus last year and that we want to use part of that surplus and designate that in your budget as encumbering prior year revenue.
So, for example, when we have a situation like this where, in fact, we've taken in a lot more with parking revenue, and it gets reported in the paper, so it seems to me that it would be smart on the city's part to say, so we took in this extra $900,000. Because of that, we're going to spend $120,000 or whatever the number is to start the Jolly Trolley project because could be, related. This is what we're doing with that funding. To me, that seems like people understand that's a, potentially a good
I think
idea.
people absolutely understand that, but why are you doing that project rather than the one on my street, or rather than the one on my street, rather than the one on my street? I think we have to look at it more from the standpoint of, yeah, we had excess revenue, more than we budgeted, and I would imagine we might even have more revenue than we budgeted in a couple of other areas by the end of the year. Again, it goes into the general fund. I think we have to look at it from the perspective of, okay, if there are things that are unfunded and we believe they should be funded, then we have to decide, okay, should we tap these resources that we have on our books? And I think, and Bert, you can tell me this, I think we did this a few years ago with the city hall. Because at the time, in I think 2017, we were looking at raising the rental tax, and it was decided at that point in time not to, but to come up with $1 million that we needed in a different fashion. And I think at that point in time, we did tap the general fund. And I think within a year and a half, because of extras, we were able to put it back.
So it goes into a reserve, basically.
Basically. And so, I think the better way to say to people is, we anticipate things like the Jolly Trolley bringing more revenues in over time. However, we can't bank on that, but this is something to kind of build the process. And maybe the same with the chairs and the convention center. This is something that we feel that is a good expenditure because we're going to get revenues back, and hopefully we replenish that portion. And we did that before, and I think it's probably something to think about. But remember that it's good to have money in the bank, because you never know when a storm might come and we don't have the parking revenue because the summer is shot, or the boardwalk's gone, or something like that. But
So a rainy day fund, and do we have a good feel for what our rainy day fund might be, or,
Well, I think you can probably look at last year's audit, and that'll give you everything. It's buried in there, but yes, there is monies. But as Bert mentioned, there's a lot of restricted monies too. Right.
Well, and Bert also mentioned last meeting too, and it's really or a couple meetings ago, that given the amount of debt that, was put into place, several years ago, that we're now having to pay off, that it makes sense to have a higher reserve fund now, given the amount of debt. So maybe that's where the 800 needs to go, or 900 needs to go. I thought that was an outstanding point. I paraphrased what you said, I think, but, because you said our reserve's a little higher, maybe it needs to be a little higher.
Well, I think you've probably all seen a report on what the cash balances were. I've presented that before. And basically, a lot of people say, well, gee, we have all this cash. We have, somewhere between $15 and $20 million worth of cash. And on that report, I'm showing, well, which ones are restricted.
Right,
And, at some point, we're going to have close to $75 million worth of debt. And much of that is associated with the outfall. And we're going to have to pay that off. At the same time, we have a revenue source. That's why we did the rate study, so we can cover those costs. But I guess my message was be cautious, because if you have $20 million worth of cash, that sounds good, but if you have $75 million worth of debt, that's something to consider. But you can say, well, where's some of our cash money that we've collected over the years? Well, we maintain 2 bank accounts for transfer tax that we collect. And transfer tax is segregated. When we get transfer tax, we just don't put it in our general operating money because state law requires you to, it's technically restricted, but the way the code's presented, it's a very broad restriction. So it's a fairly short section of the code, but it would allow you could justify for a wide range of purposes to use some of that money. So that's the closest I could get to identifying a specific source. Where's the money sitting? Everybody, that's the closest thing to our piggy bank that I can come up with. But I don't think going forward it's a good idea to get in the habit of using that too much. We're a unique situation. We haven't had a major storm here since '62, really, and who knows what kind of aid would be available. A lot of people think, well, there's going to be plenty of federal aid. I don't know that, but I tend to be a little more cautious than maybe I would otherwise if we weren't located where we are. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think a perfect example of what Bert's saying is the wastewater plant. Well, the wastewater plant cost, I don't know what it cost when it was built, but about 87% of it was paid by grants. That wouldn't happen today. And most of those a lot of those were federal grants, and the federal grants aren't coming in for something like that. Well, and I'm not saying that that's going to fall apart, but I mean, that's a perfect example. The federal money is just not available.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Mayor. The business model changed on this wastewater plant because we had so much of it funded by the federal government, and that it essentially became a cash cow instantly. We paid the debt off fairly quickly. I think the cost, I'm not sure whether it was in the $12 million area, but it went a long way toward supporting the general government for many years. Well, that model's changed. We don't have that. So what we're doing, and I think you can see it in our budgets, we're closing the gap on our general governmental funds. We used to run a bigger difference between revenues and expenses than we do, and we've been working to close that, realizing that there's not going to be revenue from the wastewater plant to support the general government. There will be some from the water operations, and we sell water out of town. So, from a theoretical basis, you might be able to say, well, gee, that's kind of our business. So that water that we sell out of town, we should be able to use for our government operations. That's an argument. But in practice, we have been using the enterprise funds that run our government.
Well, speaking of revenue, and I know we probably are getting to the end of this, and we'll talk about that next time, I guess. But one question I had, I looked at and maybe I read this wrong, but it seems like I saw the hotel accommodations tax revenue at $500,000. Is that right? Why is it that low?
Well, that's an assumption. First of all, I'm not smart enough to predict what that number is going to be. If the state would release information and tell us what they've collected in the past,
well,
we'd have some guide.
I agree.
We'll have an idea a year from now.
Yeah, but what this is saying that we're going to have, that there's I think it's about $16.6 million in hotel revenues in the city of Rehoboth. Mm-hmm. I don't know whether that's a good number or a bad number, but that's what we're saying. We're saying, 3% of that 16 million is going to produce.
I'm just remembering the excellent work that, first of all, it was in the budget last year for like $855,000 with the expectation that it was going to go in July. And when questions came up about how it may not go, so it was in there for 3/4 of the year at $855 last year before it was taken out because it didn't get approved. And then at one point, Evan did a really great analysis where you looked at all the chamber data and the number of rooms, and your analysis was almost exactly the same as the number that had been plugged in, the 855, for 3/4, and then you had 2 other months, so if it didn't get in until August, and if it didn't get into September, it would be a little less. But the lowest I saw was it starting in September, and that would be about 400 and something thousand. So that's half a year at 400,000, so it just surprises me that the budget would be that conservative.
Well, have you seen what the county has budgeted for their tax?
Yeah, so you say like 16?
No, for their tax.
Oh, no, what?
1.3 million. And I think the county's probably got 3, maybe 4 times as
Yeah.
many.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think
Okay.
they're being conservative. I think 500 is conservative
Okay.
as well. But it's something, that we'll find out, I think, with time. And I think the city manager's already said that a number of our revenues, especially the ones we don't really know,
Yeah.
you have to be a bit conservative. And I think we're probably conservative on the tax, what's that, what you just mentioned.
The transfer.
Transfer.
That all, yeah, I
Because
see
we're
that it's always
always-
less than what actually came in the year before. I got it.
Exactly.
I
And
know,
it
and I
comes
can
in-
understand that. That's
It's
very
great.
vulnerable.
But there have been years when what came in was less.
Yeah.
And who knows about the construction business in the next 12 months? I think it's going to be booming as much as it's boomed the last year, but those are some things you just have to be
I guess
conservative.
we were also, at least I was, and I think a lot of people were looking at that hotel tax coming in and really, being a nice addition, and I feel like at this point, say it is $1 million for the year, I don't know whether it will be or not, but say it is, then, and part of that may be the cost of the rooms here versus the cost in the county, I don't know. But it's gonna go, so the excess is gonna go into, it's gonna go into the cash reserves, and we won't see it anyway. So we're only gonna see 500 no matter what, right?
Maybe this year, but not necessarily the following years. I
Okay.
mean, if that happens and we see a trend toward $1 million, then certainly that's something that you can justify, the commissioners can justify in adding the family restrooms and creating a plan, that's much heftier than what we have
Well,
now.
and, I'm sorry,
Excuse me, go ahead.
just one more thing.
Go ahead, Bert.
84 Kent. If we sell that property, we're looking at between $700,000 and $800,000. I mean, that's something we should think about.
I was going to bring that up again.
Because we need to do that. I think
I
we need to
agree.
decide up here that we want to do that and move forward, because we've talked about it and talked about it and talked about it. So let's either do it or not do it, and I'm for doing it.
Well,
I'm with you.
We do have a long-term lease with the Knights of Columbus. Is it the Knights of Columbus? Yeah.
Kiwanis. Yeah.
What's that?
Kiwanis Club.
Kiwanis, I apologize. So we'd have to speak to them. I don't know that they've been using it much. Every once in a while, they
But we
cut
had an
the lawn.
action many, many, many months ago when Commissioner Calusi brought this up, that somebody was going to go talk to them. Did that happen?
I don't think it's happened.
Okay.
But I think if the consensus is to say, if we can, let's sell it, then we have to go there. But
But there was consensus, and we asked somebody to fall, there was,
I don't think
actually.
there's consensus, let's sell it.
No, there was consensus to go talk to the Kiwanis. And so that didn't happen? Okay,
Not that I know.
okay.
Well,
Well, then
I'd like
sounds
to
like we
see
should.
for next meeting, some way of either
Agree.
voting on to speak to the people, Kiwanis folks, and if possible, to have a plan to put it on the market and sell it.
I can go look through the records and say that we've already come to consensus to
Well,
at least
I
talk
thought
to
we
them.
had too, but
Yeah.
that's why I'm saying I thought we had, but if we haven't, let's just plan on doing it
Right?
next meeting.
Certainly, yep.
And I want to kind of, I'm sorry, follow up real quick, because I think this was an excellent point. And I think maybe this is what you're going to do, Sharon, or I think. But if we've projected again and again that based on data, which I'm sure that's the way I haven't did it before, that our revenue was going to be 800 or whatever the specific number Susan said, then why not build that into the budget, given some of our other priority needs, rather than just being conservative and then it going back into the general fund. So I'd just like to think about that as we go forward. Okay. And then just, I was remiss in mentioning that there was actually some public correspondence from Ms. Good that asked that we also consider, if there is some surplus, consider putting that towards paying down the wastewater water debt, or considering a rebate for the citizens or the residents, property owners. So I just wanted to bring that up. I don't know if there's a reaction now, or we talk about it if you want to at the next meeting, but I think there's some merit in having a discussion.
I've never heard of that.
Well, I'm just saying it was brought up by.
Oh, no, I've heard that.
You mean of people
But
doing
yeah,
that?
yeah,
Okay, got
because,
it.
unfortunately, and again, back to what Bert said, we've taken on a substantial amount of debt, and what's been done with the water and mostly the wastewater is so that we can pay back our debt, and our debt is responsible by all citizens, all property owners, and all users, so.
I wanted to mention one thing that we did years ago. When we started planning the construction of City Hall, we had a tax increase, property tax increase. I think it was 15%. It went up. And as part of that, the commissioners wanted to restrict that money. And basically, I bring that up because that is a tool. If you have a priority and you say, well, gee, we really want to make that happen, essentially, it's a designation in your fund balance on your financial statements where you say restricted. And there's different levels of restriction. And some are more flexible. There's about 4 levels. One's pretty loose where the city manager can sort of assign it and then change your mind or whatever if things just don't materialize. And there's also higher levels of restrictions where the government, the commissioners, say, we're going to impose this source of revenue, fees, taxes, and we designate that to be restricted for a certain specific purpose. And I bring that up just because if you have a priority, that's something you can do. And sometimes it helps you justify a fee increase or a tax increase by saying, well, we did that specifically for that purpose. And I'm not suggesting you do that, it's up to you, but I mean, that's a tool that's been used in budgeting, and actually there are accounting standards on doing that, so it's not anything that's arcane or unusual.
Are there any other budget items that the city manager should be thinking about? If we can get this process going rather than come up with new ones in the next meeting and new ones in the next meeting, please.
I just have one question. Like I remember in conversations last year, we had included funding to Main Street and maybe I missed that if it's in there, but like the fire department, I think it was like 100,000 for the fire department. Is that in donations? Oh, okay.
No, so thank you, Commissioner Sheffer. If you'll go to that tab, which is your contributions tab. And I did want to point out,
Yeah, got it.
okay, so the contributions, Rehoboth Beach Historic Society, 28,000. Fire Company, 100,000. Main Street is 50,000, however, they requested 60,000. I didn't put 60,000 in here because that's your decision to make. So that would be an adjustment we have to make, if that's where you want to go. And the library, what happened to the library? It's 15,000.
What's the first one? 28,000, what is that?
Historical Society.
Oh, historical, okay.
And would they be coming in to present like they did last year, or if it's the same amounts, would we just?
Well, they're requesting more.
Okay.
We can certainly bring them in. I didn't want to do it on your first
Oh,
day.
no, I understand. I'm actually looking forward to
Do you
whether
want,
that would be something we would be doing or not.
do you want them to come in?
I think if they're asking for an increase, they should come in.
Well, that,
Main Street asking for the increase?
yes.
They're the only ones? Okay.
The documents,
They show up for that, or?
What's that?
I just was wondering what other
I
people
think
thought.
But I think we have to make sure that we realize that for Main Street, they do not have a lease with the city. I mean, they use the place, but they use it for free. So, I mean, that's just in your consideration.
Yeah,
It's not- it's not
they
listed
would
in
have
the
to come
50.
up with a really good reason to get $10,000 more, I think. And maybe they have a
Yeah,
good
and
reason.
maybe they have the reason, so.
But so, yeah, I mean, if they want to come in and tell us why they need 10,000 more, I think
Yeah,
that's fine.
I can ask Edward to discuss that with them and ask them to come in at the,
Fire department as well?
is that a new?
No.
New
No,
amount?
that's consistent with
Yeah,
what was
I think
last
that
year.
was
And I
what we
know
gave them
Yeah, the
last
others
year.
are all
former
on
Commissioner
stars.
Mills did a lot of conversations with the fire department to justify that amount, and we were all satisfied at the time.
Yeah, I think we actually gave them more than they asked for last year. I mean, I think.
Yeah,
they
but it
did
was all, it was all easily justified, though, I believe.
Along the lines of the question I just asked, there are a couple things that I don't think are in here that I mentioned before, and just to see what your thoughts are. We had talked about, and I think it's going to be in the CDP, and it's been in discussion, about the possibility of a code update. And you and I had spoken
Right.
about it. Is that's something that we need to pay for to get an estimate, analysis done of our code versus where we want to be before we get the big price, or is that just get the big price?
So that's included in the budget. There's a $10,000 number that's in the budget under consulting fees and building and licensing. KCI has projected that out to assist us with us to get us started, to form some working groups. That number is in the budget.
All right, and the assessment, I know I spoke about that, and there hasn't been an assessment for 5 or 6 years, but there have been some comments over that time period about the assessment that was done. And I know the individual that did the assessments has not really been available in the last 3 or 4 years, and there's somebody new that's handling it. Is that something that we should think about as a projection, or maybe just put in the CIP for 22, 23, something like that?
Yeah, so I do think that we should look at it as we have one individual right now assisting with our reassessments based on building applications and upgrades. That's one individual. So if something were to happen to that individual, then we wouldn't have anyone. Kind of like what happened with the firm we had hired in 2014. And we went to, this one individual. But that's up to the commissioners. If you want to do a full-blown RFP for a property assessment, reevaluation, or just an RFP for an individual or another company to do a reassessment.
That's probably something, if you think about it. I mean, we may not want to put it in the budget this year, but maybe for the next year or something. But to consider whether we just do a full-blown, which is more costly, obviously, or just somebody to address what's there. So, something to think about. And I think that's it with all of mine. Anybody else have any suggestions for the city manager to look at?
I just want to make sure that she captured everything, because we were kind of going back and forth, but we can follow up with that afterwards if you want, the things that we asked her to look at. I know for me it was, do you feel like you captured all those? We went
Yeah, I
back and forth
feel,
and back and forth. Okay,
There's
good.
5 other dates set aside, so I think hopefully we don't need them all, but
Right.
if we do, I think we have a start to come back to you.
Before we adjourn, I know there's been citizen comment. Walter, did you want to say something? And I'll come to you, Stan.
Good afternoon, Walter Green, 123 Milton Avenue. As you're going through the paperwork, thank you, Ms. City Manager, for all the information you gave us. And I work with Mr. Charlie Moore at Coastal Towing, Coastal Containers. And we roll off containers, according to Charlie, about an hour and a half ago now, not to exceed 45 $500 delivered versus 7,000.
Thank you.
I have one question, if you would consider answering. State Road open space enhancements, I didn't hear what that was about. That was the last item. You were talking about Lake Gerard tot lot, and you never got item number 68 on the upright paper.
Wasn't that Commissioner Byrne had?
No, so we,
What is it?
Is that the ADA stuff?
well, the enhancements to the state road are the, we worked with DelDOT. DelDOT owns the property there at that triangle.
Oh, okay. That's
And they would permit us to put in some colorful vegetation there to make it, to dress it up. This is something that's been talked about before. So that's what that is. We're getting a new sign for that area included in the merge proposal. So if you wanted to dress it up, that's what that is. Liz has been working with DelDOT in order to get that permission.
Can we put a rain garden there? Would it make any sense? Let's catch rain.
Why add stuff to take care of?
Well, no, rain gardens are
Take
supposed
care of
to.
themselves.
Excuse me, my time. Survey of Rehoboth. So many of the items that were on the survey, and I didn't finish it, I didn't turn it in, but what I hear most about it is what all the people want, all the beautiful things. But I've been around long enough to remember when the roof fell in down at the sewer plant, it came up to be an emergency item, and then you didn't do anything for at least a year and a half with it. The equipment was falling down because it was supported by the ceiling. And I would remind you how important it is for the public works garage. If they need a roof, it shouldn't be leaking. You're counting on that equipment to get out. And just like the street sweeper, I remember a year ago, and folks, this isn't funny, we didn't have a street sweeper to put on the street because one was down for repair and the other broke an axle or something close to that, and we had nothing. I don't know whether they need to be rebuilt, but the one that was to be repaired, it was waited till the wrong time of year to be fixed. It should have been waiting for the leaves and whatever to be taken care of, and it should not have been delayed. We should have a spare. And the other item, the skid loader and the trailer are important because historically we have waited until the storm has come and then everybody's gone to Grand Rental Station and places like that and to the other side of the county to rent equipment, when we should have one right here for taking care of the boardwalk, a storm, public works for the sewer plant or the water guys. It would be an enhancement, and something like that needs to be purchased. Thank you.
Mills.
Thank you. I'd like to address you as Chair of the Boardwalk and Beach Committee. As you know, the Boardwalk and Beach Committee's major mission statement is to maintain the boardwalk and beach as major assets. And if you have any doubts about the beach and boardwalk being major assets, look at the CDP surveys, the 3 surveys, and you'll see that the beach and boardwalk dominate a lot of the responses there. In terms of the budget, you all received 2 reports from us that kind of articulated a 2-year summary of what are our priorities. We found it easier to just relate them to you in terms of major priority, secondary priority, third priority. It's hard to put them in terms of this is first, second, third, and fourth. If you have any questions on it, please give me a call. But I would like to address one thing that's very important. You know, we know that we're an advisory committee. We make recommendations. We know they need to be vetted by the mayor and commissioners and city manager. And if they're desired to go forward and cost any money, that funds need to be secured for those. I just wanted to review one thing with you, and that is our focus for a while on family restrooms. That kind of touched all of our hearts because of constituents coming to us and sharing their stories about having to escort spouses or partners, whatever, children into the restrooms and not being able to because they were of opposite sexes or so. You know, we have constituent letters that we may or may not have shared with you. I believe we did and attached to our reports. But also the focus came from conversations we had with the boardwalk kiosk down at the Delaware Avenue restroom, who would get dozens and dozens of inquiries about where can they go for family restrooms. And their only response was to direct people to Gus and Gus. So thank goodness Gus and Gus has opened their restrooms to people. And I have not been in their restrooms, but I imagine they're little claustrophobic little things, and I don't know how you can get a wheelchair in there, or two people, or two adults, or whatever. But I think they're for consideration. One of the things that we believed that we heard was in terms of the Delaware Avenue restroom improvements, which would include family restrooms, that the design and implementation of that could occur this year ready for next summer, provided there was funding available, of course. And that the design for the Baltimore Avenue restrooms, to include some family restrooms and a second floor for the beach patrol, could be undertaken this winter time, but the construction for that deferred another year for another budget session. So needless to say, the committee is very excited to hear those things. So I'm going to relay to them, and obviously they're going to be disappointed that they're not going to get funding in there for family restrooms, but I think they will be very understanding of it. I can't speak on behalf of the committee, but I would place a bet that there would be unanimous urging by every member of the committee to do something this year for this summer to provide family restroom opportunities. In other words, teach all our seasonal officers, or cadets they're going to be called, to direct people to the downstairs and have that available, because there's a family restroom downstairs. I don't know if you all know. Work out something with the Delaware Avenue kiosk and the beach patrol and the seasonals, cadets, whatever, and can we direct people on the boardwalk, because that's our focus, people on the boardwalk, near the boardwalk. Direct them to the beach patrol, where the medical center within the beach patrol has their own bathroom that might be able to accommodate them. Just for one summer, or two summers, let's do that.
And I agree with you.
And then the last thing is, can we not do something with the Delaware Avenue restroom for this summer at least, to do something? I don't know if you remember, but I gave a report some time ago, and it had a floor plan of the Delaware Avenue restroom that's got a hybrid section. It's got a men's section, it's got a women's section, and then it's got a third restroom section that's typically open full-time into an L to augment the women's restroom. Could not somebody, if they're directed there, the attendants or the kiosk people, close off that back room, or maybe we section it off? We do something creative to be able to turn at least part of that, if not all of it, into a family restroom. The 20 times a year, 50 times a year or summer that is needed. And so, again, I'm urging you on behalf of the committee that I believe that they would have unanimous consent with what I just conferred to you. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Pat. I know you were supportive. I should never cut off a supporter.
No, I think that we've asked the city manager to look into some other options there. So I think it's been heard. Thank you.
Anything else? If not, this meeting's adjourned. Thank you.